So let me just open this conference and welcome you. Thank you very much for coming, especially those who come from abroad and very far. So they will have some time to introduce themselves and explain why they are here. And then I will say some words at the end to talk about the energy program in IMéRA. So I just want to leave the floor to the president of the foundation IMéRA, Denis Bertin, who is finishing right now his speech. Denis, the floor is yours, and then you have a sequence of very good friends who will explain why. And I'm happy to collaborate with us. Thank you.
So, good afternoon. Dear the director of the Institute for Advanced Studies French Networks, so dear Olivier, dear the manager of the Center for Mediterranean Integration and the World Bank, dear the research and development director of the Soundtrack Company, dear the director of the Baker Institute for Energy, dear the program director of Delmenhorst Institute for Advanced Studies, dear founding members of IMéRA, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. First, I have to apologize Pierre Capeta, who is Vice President for Research of Aix-Marseille University, who cannot be present. So just after some words from the President of IMéRA, some words of Aix-Marseille University and from the Vice President of Research. So as President of the IMéRA, which is a foundation for Aix-Marseille University, it's a great pleasure and honor to welcome you for the first conference cycle of the 10th anniversary of IMéRA. Following last week in Paris, so the 10th anniversary ceremony of the French network with the French Minister of Research and Education, IMéRA initiates today and today and tomorrow the one-year programs of conference cycles, not only from here but also from the three over campus with Nantes, Lyon, and Paris for this 10th anniversary ceremony. So it's a great pleasure also, thanks to Raouf, about the topic for the first conference cycle based on energy and challenges and prospects. It's maybe a good time in France because maybe you know next week many strike will be present about energy. And the price of energy, right? So maybe you will discuss during the next today and tomorrow. So. Thanks, Raouf, for this conference first, and all the speakers and co-organizer for these 2 days, involving many disciplines. So IMéRA and Aix-Marseille University, and IMéRA more, is very important to improve, to open discussions with various communities, with different disciplines, with different areas from public, from private position, and so on and so on. So this is really the site to be with no taboo, with no frontiers, and open discussions and confrontation about ideas. So 10 years, yeah. I would like Robert to mention Robert Hilbert, and also Pierre Livet and Gilles Dorival, who are here in the room, who, and mainly Robert, who cannot be present today, but he was, so 10 years ago, in 2007, I think, discussion with the French government about the creation of Institute for Advanced Studies, mainly dedicated to social and human science, at the national level, so strong discussion with the minister at that time. And the decision was, yes, we can create some institute promoting social and human science in France, and also internationalizations of this community. And the idea of having residency from all over the world on different topics depending on these 4 sites, so Marseille, Lyon, Paris, and Nantes, which were very complementary at that time, was very a key challenge and not so easy to manage. So during the period 2008, with the born of this institute, and during the first years of the institute. Mainly here, so some word of what we did here, the creation and the evolution of the IMéRA, so the Institute for Advanced Studies dedicated to social and human science, and also Méditerranéen. So Institute of IMéRA is Institut Méditerranéen de recherche, d'études et de recherche avancée in French. Was in the same time with the creation of Aix-Marseille University. Some words, before 2012 existed 3 universities, Aix-Marseille 1, 2, and 3, where these 3 pre-existed university share science faculties, but some of them are belonging social and human science, Aix-Marseille 1, law in Aix-Marseille 3, and health science is Aix-Marseille 2. So after a merging process, so in 2012, was created Aix-Marseille University. And at that time, the discussion was, what are we able to do about IMéRA? Is it important for what we can consider Aix-Marseille University an international one? Is it important to have this kind of institute? For what? For who? And is it only for residents of highly scientists or artists and so on? Or could we ask to IMéRA to be and to play an important role on this site? The decision was the second one, so that's why we created good time. So Sylvie Davier, Vice President for International Relationships, welcome. And so the decision was to ask to IMéRA to be the tools to promote Aix-Marseille University and its partners here to promote interdisciplinary research for all people here, to improve interaction with research and education staff here with residents, so how to improve discussions and emerging of new projects, and how we able to be attractive, not only for junior and senior scientists, but also for students, master, PhD, postdoc. So that's a work did by the staff of IMéRA and more recently by Raouf. And now IMéRA is well structured with 4 programs in complete agreement with the policy and strategy of Aix-Marseille University and its partners, mainly French organisms like CNRS, CNRS in many science, from human and social science, life, exact and exact science. In CERN, in mainly French organisms dedicated to health science. And EHESS, so in social and human science, and many other French organisms like IRD and so on and so on. So the 4 programs are Energie, and globalization and mondialization, and mainly under topics on Energie. So 2-day programs, but whole the year. The second program is art and science. So are we able to innovate and to create knowledge and so on, mixing scientists and artists? So we have many aspects. Also a research unit here in Aix-Marseille University and CNRS. The third one is not on the list, is Méditerranée. So maybe you know, but at the European level, President Macron asked the European community last year just to rebuild the European community with the creation of European university, and Aix-Marseille University with 7 partners from the European area work on a project of European university with Méditerranée is one of the topics about mobility, about many things, energy too. So this is the first, and the fourth one is interdisciplinary. Are we able to experiment new approach about interdisciplinary? So, and these programs are based on cycles and also in residence. So thanks a lot for the evolution for Rauf, under Rauf, policy and strategy and management, and all the colleagues involved in. So some words about energy. It's a strong topic here in this site, with many disciplines from social and human science, from law, from environment, from chemistry, physics, and from engineering, from economics, from health, from, okay. Maybe this is a topic which involves the larger discipline in this site. And about Méditerranée, it's also another topic about energy and Méditerranée. I think you're in some conference this afternoon or tomorrow, I think. And just to point out another, what is very important, we have a common research unit with the MIT about urban physics. And what we work on is just to compare ordered, very ordered, like crystalline network, so ordered town, like in US, or non-ordered town, like in Marseille or in the north, in the north of Africa. What they demonstrated that it's classical, it's quite comparable with physics of material science. The energy needed for crystals is higher compared to amorphous materials like glass, for example. And we published, last year, I think, a strong correlation between material science about crystallinity or amorphous structure with ordered or non-ordered town, about what is the cost of energy and so on and so on. So just to give you an example that interdisciplinary and energy, and how are we able to push knowledge towards the society, and how are we able to build new town, for example, how to produce new energy with the French system, with the French government, where we have a strong debate about energy or ecological transitions, and depending of nuclear energy and so on and so on. So just to conclude that IMéRA is university-based for Institute for Advanced Studies. That means a strong correlation and relationship with the scientific community, strong demand to educate young people, masters, PhD, and also this education and research. It's very important to have a strong link together, education research, towards not only junior and higher scientists, but also towards youngs, to educate in the future new scientists, and hoping to build a better society. So thanks a lot for to be present here. Great pleasure, and good discussions, and really happy to open the sessions of the 10 years of French Institute of Advanced Studies, mainly dedicated to social and human science. But what we did and what we now do here is not only now social and human science, but it's really for whole disciplines here, and promoting interdisciplinary discussions and maybe results. So thanks a lot. To thank you all, I won't do, again, the list of people I would like to acknowledge, but at least let me say a word of thanks to two people here, to Denis and to Raouf, for inviting us. I'm the small purple R on the right-hand side of your screen. This stands for, R stands for réseau, in English, network. And I'm the head of the research foundation created back in 2007, but started in 2008. So also we celebrated, as Denis said a few minutes ago, our 10th anniversary last week with the French Minister of Higher Education and Research, Madame Frédérique Vidal. And we here, as we've been supporting over the past 10 years the Institute for Advanced Study in Marseille, or in Aix-Marseille. It's always like a discussion with my colleagues saying, but is that the Institute for Advanced Study of Aix-Marseille? Or, yes, true, because it's the supported by Aix-Marseille University, but it's based in Marseille. So we have always this kind of discussion, but we have been supporting this institute over the past 10 years. And we're extremely happy to see that the potential that we've seen at the beginning has been able to concretize with a fully fledged Institute for Advanced Study. I remember because I started running this foundation back in 2007, and some of these institutes were ideas. And also it shows also it's interesting because it shows that ideas can impact reality, and if you incubate them and transform them into institutions, social objects, they do have an impact on reality. So I remember the discussion back in 2007, 2008, how to build an Institute for Advanced Study, and obviously we are all scientists in the room. Before we ask the question of how, we need to ask the question of why. So why build Institute for Advanced Study in France, and why start 4 Institutes for Advanced Studies in Paris, Lyon, Marseille, and Nantes, in four cities with large scientific communities, and we were like kind of late entrance in the IAS Institute for Advanced Study game. It started, as you all know, back in the early 30s at Princeton University, giving the possibility for non-English speaking scholars fleeing from the catastrophes of Europe to be able to, not to teach so much, but to be able to work together and to have a free space for thinking, and especially for innovative thinking, and possibly for innovative interdisciplinary thinking. And this model started in the 30s, was imported in Europe in the late 60s. We'll be actually celebrating next week the 50th anniversary of the Zentrum für interdisziplinaire Forschung in Bielefeld, ZIF, that started its activities in 1968, and then followed by many other institutes of advanced study in Europe. So we've been late in entering this game for many reasons that I would be happy to discuss with you over the break, but basically our research institutions and higher education institutions didn't have the potential to create this type of institutions by themselves, in a sense that they were universities were working mostly through the 70s, 80s, 90s, struggling with a lot of national constraints, and they were not putting an emphasis so important on interdisciplinarity and internationalization. And what we, at some point, was decided
and often in France to have a kind of impetus coming from the center, was to say, well, okay, what we can try to do, at least at our level, is to collaborate with those universities who would be willing to bring forward this dimension of interdisciplinarity and internationalization of scholarship to co-fund some initiatives. And in a sense, the reality of the IMéRA today, there is a strong investment by Aix-Marseille University, obviously. You mentioned that. It's a university-based institute for advanced study, but still, we as the public money or the government money play an important role. I would not say a key role, but an important role in helping the development and the blossoming of these institutes through channels, two channels. The first one was an endowment we received back in 2007 that helped us start and help co-fund the good projects developed locally on the 4 sites. And then we got in this not only the label but also the funding going with the Excellence Laboratory of the network of the 4 institutes for advanced study. That gave us the possibility to have a multi-year support, and now we embarked in a multi-year funding of these institutes with a convention, a contract between the foundation network and the constituents in order for them to know 4 years ahead what would be the funding, at least from our part. So these are, I would say, great success, and the IMéRA is one of the shining successors among the 4, I think, very good developments we have witnessed in the 4 situations. Just to give you an idea, now we're inviting 100 scholars every year, or over 100 scholars every year on the 4 sites. They're all picking up. So this means that it's a rather large international invitation program. Now, like IMéRA, Raouf always corrects me because the numbers are changing and rising, so I always have to update my knowledge, but now you are inviting around 200 research a month, which is a good medium-sized institute for advanced study compared to, you have smaller ones and you have larger ones, but it's a good size because what we want to do and what we want to achieve in an institute for advanced study is a dialogue across disciplines, intellectual traditions, and international backgrounds. And you need for this to have a critical mass of people. We will stay for a while, at least a semester, possibly an academic year, in the same space, without claustrophobia, because as you can see, there are a lot of them space, but still to have a sociability of research, to have a kind of continued conversation and discussion across disciplines, across intellectual traditions, across I would say international backgrounds, so that you can really think out of the box. We're always saying, well, we need to think out of the box, but in the mainstream institutions, it's difficult to do so. What you provide here in an institute for advanced study is a space, it's time, and good scientific accompaniment. And in IMéRA, or at IMéRA, they're really lucky because they have the 3 dimensions of it. They have a great space, as you can see. They offer the time for thinking and for renewed conversation, renewed interaction, renewed exchange, not only among the co-fellows, but, and it's a striking feature of the IMéRA, but between the institution and the scientific partners and the scientific and higher education research partners of the site and nationally. This means that here, when you come for a residency, for a fellowship, you will embark in a discussion with co-fellows, but also you will have a lot of interactions with other labs, other research centers, other research facilities that are located here, and possibly through the international network of Aix-Marseille University and the help of the foundation, and I will just conclude on that in a minute, with the help of the foundation to also broaden the international networks that you can have and when you come as a fellow. So the key dimension of an institute is really to focus on this interdisciplinary dialogue, this dialogue across tradition, but we don't want just to leave to stop here or to stop at that point. It's a great starting point, but for us it's a starting point. And that's maybe the difference between what we call the Institute for Advanced Study of the first generation and the Institute for Advanced Study of the second generation. And the IMéRA would be a perfect example of the second or the third generation, whatever generation. But the new generation is that you don't really... It's great to leave scholars at the time to do curiosity-driven research, to embark in intellectual exchanges, but it's not enough. It's the starting point. What we want to do and what they do at IMéRA is really to accompany this and to transform this conversation into incubation and to transform the incubation into projects. And that's something I think it's a key feature of the activity of our institutions is really to leave the space and time to converse, to exchange, but then to incubate something. Because the idea is not only to say, okay, we had a great conversation, we had a great time, I was, having fun with my colleagues from sociology and philosophy and mathematics, and wow, okay, now I'll go back to my home institution at the end of it. No, we want to put this 5-month or 1-year stay into a longer perspective. And you put this in a longer perspective because you will provide the right scientific accompaniment to network and to develop, to incubate new projects. And it's what they do really absolutely in a great way at the Institute for Advanced Study. I won't list, maybe you will do it at some point during the day and a half, but they have had numerous successes in transforming an initial conversation into a project. And here's my kind of conclusion on this. It's not only to stimulate innovative thinking, which is great by itself. The Institute for Advanced Study have been often branded as breeding zones of new ideas, in a sense. Places where you can, lead the knowledge flow and articulate itself and lead to new projects. So this is good. What we want to do, and also for the sake of the supporting institutions, is to have a long-term impact. A long-term impact in terms of scientific collaboration, a long-term impact in terms of projects and possibly internationally funded projects, because the idea is not to deprovincialize French scholarship, but to bring a kind of European perspective and international perspective on the main societal challenges of today and tomorrow. And what we try to do, and here again we accompany the IMéRA on this road, because I run the Institute for the network of European Institute for Advanced Study. These are 24 institutes in Europe. We got 2 funding from the European Commission, 8 million euros to co-fund fellowships in some of these institutes. And the idea is to, when you come to IMéRA, you not only come to a great scientific potential base in Aix-Marseille, but you are networked at the European level, because you can work, if the topic is interesting, you can build links with the people at the Hebrew University, you can link with the people in Bologna, you can link with people in Madrid, you can link with people in Berlin or in Stockholm. So the idea, or Delmenhorst, because we have my friend and colleague here. So the idea is really to bring, and our foundation has been instrumental in a sense, because we have been coordinating this network and another network that I would like to mention, the World University-Based Institute for Advanced Study Network, UBIAS, with 47 members. And the World Congress of this network will take place at IMéRA in 2020, in spring 2020. And it's exactly the type of thing that we can help. We're not here to do research programming. We leave that to Raouf and the very good people with him to do that, the 4 program coordinators and so on. So we're hands-off, in a sense. We just provide support in order for this to have a longer perspective and to be able to impact research communities in France and Europe and internationally. And my concluding word is on energy, the topic of this conference, which is starting this cycle of 4 major conferences taking place in the 4 institutes for advanced study through April 2019. The topic of energy is crucial, as you all know in this room, and better than I do, so I won't be telling much about that. But I'm involved in the programming of FP9, the 9th framework program. And we know that it will be around between 9 and 10 billion euros for research on clean energy, on energy transition, on climate change, on all these very important issues, on the management of scarce natural resources. So we all know that there will be a lot of also funding, and this funding needs to fund innovative projects. Not the same thing rehashing again and again and again, but if you want to have innovative projects, you have to have spaces where you can have time to incubate this kind of out-of-the-box thinking projects. And IMéRA is absolutely the right place to do so. So as an outcome, in maybe 1 or 2 years from now, I would be extremely happy to see out of this conference collaborations, co-fellowships funded by partners, collaborations with institutions in order to bring forward new thinking on this key idea, on these key societal challenges that we'll be facing in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raouf, for your kind invitation. Good afternoon to everyone. I'm very delighted to be here with this distinguished panel. Before telling you about the Center for Mediterranean Integration, which I have the honor to lead, I will tell you that I'm also a proud member of the Council of the University of Aix-Marseille, where I conducted my PhD only a few years ago, after which I went to the World Bank, and I was based in Washington for 27 years until I came back to my roots in Marseille last year. I am very happy that the CMI and IMéRA have recently started conversations on how we are going to cooperate moving forward, and I will give you a few details about what we plan to do, particularly on 2 areas. One is the subject of this conference, energy, and the other one is on migration and labor and job mobility. But let me tell you first a bit about the Center for Mediterranean Integration, and perhaps following the example of the previous speaker, I will talk first about the why before telling you about the what and the how. The reason why the Center for Mediterranean Integration was created also 10 years ago, there is a common thread here about anniversaries. Yes, we definitely should, is that the concept and the goal of Mediterranean integration, as you all know, it's a very noble goal, but very difficult to achieve. There are numerous political, economic, and social obstacles. And at the same time, I think all countries in the Mediterranean realize that without such integration, there will be numerous vulnerabilities. The region is full of opportunities, at the same time challenges. In terms of opportunities, a huge amount of working age population and growing in the next years. Tremendous wealth of natural resources, mainly renewable sources of energy, the wind, the sun. Other type of non-renewable resources that have been critical to the growth of the region, especially in the last years, and many numerous other assets. At the same time, this is a region that has tremendous vulnerabilities. The region suffers from the effects of the wars in the neighboring countries, in Syria, Yemen, other countries that affects tremendously the dynamics of the region. And it is also a region where growth has remained lower than other parts of the world, and where economic and trade integration has progressed less, to put it mildly, less fast than in other parts of the world, such as Asia or even Latin America. So for this reason, the World Bank and the French government, about 10 years ago, it will be 10 years in 2019, decided to open the Center for Mediterranean Integration. And we will talk about why Marseille in a minute. The reason was that they wanted to have an influence and bring these countries together, build numerous alliances along different vectors of integration, something that could not be achieved just with the lending of the World Bank. They realized that this is a region at the time that had not much lending, but the loans that the World Bank was putting in place in these countries were not disbursing very well, either because of lack of capacity or because of lack of understanding of the reforms or lack of commitment to the reforms that were agreed. So they thought that the knowledge sharing would be like like the soft power that can influence policy making, and that by putting together both sides of the Mediterranean and particularly linking think tanks, researchers, civil society organizations, as well as government and the multilateral institutions behind, mainly the World Bank and the European Investment Bank, it would be possible to bring the dialogue about integration to another level. So this is the why. This is the reason why the center was created. In this almost 10 years, I believe the center has been influential in many ways. But in my capacity, my humble capacity since I arrived, I would like to take the center to another level, and that's why we're here today, because working with IMéRA will help us increase the technical excellence of the center. Because the center has already had a reputation about knowledge sharing, the platform that brings together all the partners of both sides of the Mediterranean. But we really want to be known as a center of technical excellence, and we cannot do that without the partners like IMéRA. So this is just an example, and I will leave copies with you. This is just a brochure about the center, but these are two examples of the work that we have done. This is called Transitions in the Mediterranean. And it was prepared by a group of thinkers of the region from different disciplines. So it's also a similar model like IMéRA, because it's not just economists. It's sociologists, people who are even psychologists who understand the society, how things work, who get together and discuss themes that are of great importance for the region at a particular moment in time. So about 8 years ago, it was Transitions in the Mediterranean, and this report, even though it's thin, it's full of important policy recommendations, was very influential for the EU neighborhood policy, and also for the strategy of the World Bank for the North Africa and Middle East region. So if you look at that strategy today, you will find many of the axes that were highlighted in this report. And again, the good part about it is not the CMI, it's really the members of this cycle who came up with these recommendations after several meetings and several series of dialogues. The topic that was chosen after Transitions in the Mediterranean was preventing violent extremism. And again, the CMI is a neutral platform to discuss topics like this. Some of the Mediterranean countries said, I cannot discuss this in my country. I just can't. Politically, it would be difficult. But the CMI is neutral. It's safe. Let's do it at the CMI, where we can hear different views from different countries. And again, it's all policy-oriented in a constructive way, trying to distill lessons for policymakers. The third theme, which we are just launching, in fact, this month, is focused on education, labor mobility, and migration. And this is, again, the area where we hope to collaborate with IMéRA. Migration will be addressed here as a positive thing and not as a negative one, because often when we hear migration, we think immediately of migration pressures on the population, demands of social services, etc. We want to turn this around and present migration as an opportunity in the sense that we want to look at labor mobility and what are the obstacles to labor mobility in the region that may be undermining growth. We know from the literature that moving resources from low productivity to high productivity areas is positive for growth. So by definition, any obstacle to such mobility will undermine growth. So the idea is that we want to look at migration in a proactive way, because most of the agreements between the north and the south of the Mediterranean focus on control or reducing pressures, but they don't have necessarily a proactive approach to it. So the idea is to look at this from the viewpoint of human capital, how the human capital training of young people who are the future of the region could be channeled in a way that would giving them more mobility, they could contribute to the growth of the region. And we know that there is a demographic dividend problem in the north, so we don't think of migration as the solution, but it could be one of the factors that can be conducive to building these bridges between the north and the south and to stronger and faster growth overall in the region. So let me say perhaps a few words now about energy, which is the topic of this event. And my colleague Silvia Pariente, who also has long experience from the World Bank, who is an expert in energy. I am not. Will be here with you during the rest of the day and tomorrow, and she will also be a speaker, so she can perhaps transmit better than me what we want to do at the CMI on this topic. But broadly speaking, we believe that countries will have to really scale up their policies on renewable energies if they want to meet the CO21 Paris Agreement goals. And this cannot be done without the regional integration of the market, of the Mediterranean market. And when we talk about regional integration, we think of electricity connectors, access to water resources, and other resources of energy that would allow continuity and that would provide the energy that is needed when there are fluctuations or changes in the demand that is difficult to predict. So the idea is that we will work together with the EU on the integration of the energy market. We work very closely with the European Commission on this topic, and our goal is to explain and get feedback from countries in the south that would be affected by this policy, because the policy was designed for the EU members, but there is room in that policy to include and expand the market to the countries in the south, and there are already numerous interconnections already between Spain and Morocco, for example, Italy and Tunisia. I understand that they are quite difficult to implement and that the financing is still missing, but this is the area that the CMI would like to focus on, and we would welcome association with researchers, because we are not a research institute, we are a knowledge-sharing institute, but the advantage is that we can bring the resources from the World Bank. We have a whole department of energy at the World Bank who can support us. The same on other topics like human capital. We work with the education global practice of the World Bank. Our chief economist, Rava Areski, who is very good friends with Raouf, will also be in Marseille. We have an event next week with the PACA government, and he is the one behind many of these changes at the CMI at the moment. And we constantly look for additional partnerships, especially on the substance. And for that, we definitely welcome the association with IMéRA. And I hope this will be the beginning of a longer-term relationship. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for your invitation. Really great pleasure to share with you and to discuss about the transition of energy. From the South country, I think I am only one person from the South Mediterranean country, and it's very, very, very interesting to give some information about our strategy, our vision about the energy transition, and some recent orientation for Algerian country, and especially from my oil and gas company, Sonatrach in Algeria. Following the last presentation for Mrs. from World Bank, yes, because she asked the possibility and the opportunity to discuss between South country in Mediterranean and the North country. In Algeria, there are very interesting programs for energy transition. First one, there are the suppliers for very, I think, 3 or 4 countries from in the north, Italy, Spain, Portugal, by pipe, the gas. I think Algeria is the third one after Russia, Norway. Algeria is the third one, the supplier for gas. The second, the LNG, liquefied natural gas. There are high potential in Algeria, certainly with Qatar and Russia and some other country, and there are very, very interesting programs to intensify the possibility to generate a huge quantity of LNG. The third one is the shale gas. The shale gas, in the program, there are very, very interesting communication about the shale gas. The ESA in Canada, there are the very, very interesting example, because USA initially imported very important quantity of gas. Actually, there are the embassies. They export gas and oil to Europe, Asia. Algeria, actually, regarding the report of International Energy Agency, is the third or the fourth country in the world with reserve in France and in Silurian geological formation. After Russia, after China and Argentina, Algeria is the third one, and there are very, very interesting programs to explore, to develop some wells to generate shale gas from the south of Mediterranean. And certainly, because there are, we observe the 5 years there are the intensification in the local consumption of gas in Algeria and the demand in Europe. And actual reserve, conventional reserve in Algeria don't satisfy the demand of Europe. It's necessary to go and to search other source of gas. This shale gas, there are an opportunity in my country, in my company, to generate additional quantity of gas and to serve for consumer in Europe. The third one, the third very, very interesting, is the solar power in Algeria, in the south, in Sahara, Libya, Algeria. And there are the very interesting program because for 4.2 gigawatt will be programmed for this program, the new program of Sonatrach 2030, to generate for in the last 21 gigawatt. And 30 years, there are 4.2 gigawatt generated from mixed energy, especially from solar, because there are the potential sun power in Algerian Sahara. Regarding to, after receiving the program from Raouf, I observed there are the mix between different sources of energy. And certainly disciplinary aspect, I certainly discussed with some in the round table and some speaker, and the mix between different profiles, different science, technology, social, health, and different other additional specialty can generate and stimulate innovation to cherish other source of energy. In the last, I think, switch in French, just to remercier donc IMéRA pour l'organisation de cette rencontre assez intéressante. Certainement donc générer et regrouper des disciplines différentes, de différents profils, différentes spécialités, différents pays, différentes compagnies. Hein. Donc vous avez des universitaires, des scientifiques, des académiciens, mais aussi des industriels, des connaisseurs. Du point de vue de recherche, donc, nous sommes obligés, donc, au moins dans notre pays, mais certainement ça fait un bon moment dans plusieurs pays à travers le monde, de regarder donc l'aspect de la demande énergétique, mais aussi par rapport aux impacts environnementaux. Le dernier récent, donc le COP21, les orientations de réduire l'effet de serre, réduire la température à 2 degrés, où tout le monde est en train de travailler. Donc lorsqu'on va analyser, nous avons entendu donc l'intervention et la vision de la Banque mondiale par rapport aux besoins énergétiques, mais aussi par rapport aux effets, nous remarquons qu'il y a un effet donc purement stratégique. Stratégique certainement, c'est spécifique pour chaque pays. Vous avez l'aspect économique, parce que regarder ou bien analyser la source d'énergie, certainement nous devrons donc regarder la source, mais aussi quels sont les coûts additionnels. Aujourd'hui, il y a une réduction importante entre le prix réel de revient des énergies fossiles et la réduction importante du prix de revient de l'énergie solaire. Donc nous sommes vraiment à une légère différence par rapport au coût de revient du kilowatt-heure généré par le solaire ou bien par l'éolien, si on compare par rapport au fossile. Ça donne donc une réflexion que dire que l'avenir des renouvelables, elle est assez intéressante. Mais certainement, on ne peut pas tout avoir du renouvelable. Je dirais certainement l'électricité, mais il y a toute la partie de la pétrochimie, le raffinage, où la demande devrait donc aussi regarder l'avenir des conventionnels, donc pétrole ou gaz. Le gaz aujourd'hui, c'est une source assez intéressante parce qu'elle est considérée comme potentielle source additionnelle après le fossile, vu ses performances du point de vue environnemental, mais aussi par rapport aussi à l'aspect économique. Nous sommes le 3e pays donc, exportateur pour les pays d'Europe, avec les gazoducs, donc Medgaz via l'Espagne, Maroc, mais aussi vers l'Espagne et le Portugal. Nous exportons aussi du gaz liquéfié donc, vers l'Europe, vers l'Asie, donc via le méthanier. Et nous envisageons, donc c'est un programme assez intéressant, dans la vision Sonatrach 2030. 2025 au moins, donc j'ai parlé du pouvoir donc, en solaire, donc 4,2 gigawatts solaires, dont nous sommes obligés d'y aller et d'obtenir et satisfaire le marché national à 1 gigawatt donc à la fin 2000, et on envisage aller à plus de ça en 2025-2030. En plus du solaire, j'ai parlé du fil gaz. Nous sommes le troisième, quatrième pays à travers le monde, après donc les États-Unis, la Chine, l'Argentine. Nous avons un potentiel dans l'information géologique, donc chilérien et francilien, et je pense qu'il y a un potentiel à faire. Nous avons fait, donc, ça fait 2-3 années dans le Sahara algérien au niveau d'Ain Saleh, les premiers forages en fracturation horizontale verticale. Nous avons généré donc un potentiel intéressant et encourageant, et je pense que l'avenir du shale gaz en Algérie, c'est presque obligatoire, parce qu'il y a une demande assez intéressante en Europe du gaz, il y a une consommation assez intéressante au niveau local, vu l'industrialisation du pays, et par conséquent, nous devrons donc rechercher d'autres sources additionnelles au gaz conventionnel. Donc l'avenir pour l'Algérie, pour le gaz, éventuellement pour l'Europe, nous avons donc une source assez importante en termes de réserves, et nous envisageons donc produire à l'horizon 2025 à peu près 40 billions cubiques mètres donc, de gaz shale, mais aussi à 70 billions cubiques mètres à l'horizon 2040. Donc il y a donc de la ressource, et tout ça, ça fait un mix entre le solaire, entre le shale gaz, et éventuellement entre le conventionnel classique dont nous avons alimenté donc l'Europe depuis quelques pays. Donc je ne vais pas tarder. Merci Raouf, merci pour l'ensemble des organisateurs, et heureux d'être avec vous.
Merci.
Thank you for having me here, Raouf. This is a great opportunity to sort of seek ways to explore deeper collaboration, which I'm always open to. A little history about what the Baker Institute is, because I realized during lunch not everybody really knows what we do. The Baker Institute for Public Policy was founded in 1993, so we are in our 25th year, and actually having a big anniversary celebration later this year, which I will come back to in a moment. But it was founded on the principle of being nonpartisan. So a place where disparate views can come together and engage in robust and civil dialogue, which is incredibly important. The founder, or the chair, the honorary chair of the Baker Institute is former Secretary of State James Baker, who has a long and pretty deep history in European politics as well as politics around the world from his role as Secretary of State in the United States. And he brought with him the idea that there should be civil discourse when discussing periods of great change. And I often remark when talking about that element of his persona, he oversaw from his seat in the United States the fall of the Berlin Wall and the dismantling of the Soviet Union. And what's interesting about that is not a single shot was fired. That's something that's worth thinking about and reflecting upon, because in the current world that we live in, political rhetoric is often very divisive. It's hard to imagine that something like that could actually occur, where diplomacy actually works. And so we try to carry that mantle forward at the Baker Institute in everything that we do. The Center for Energy Studies is the largest program in the Baker Institute. But we also have programs in health and biosciences. We have programs on tax policy, which is much more domestically focused, but as you might imagine, very engaged in the climate discussion. Because Secretary Baker, along with former Secretary of State George Shultz, famously suggested the idea of a carbon dividends program, which is the idea of having a tax that the receipts from which, if the U.S. government would adopt it, would be rebated to the general public, so that you don't have regressivity, which is often a major concern among economists when you start taxing energy. In particular, it has a disproportionately larger impact on poor individuals, and so you have to figure out ways to overcome those issues. But we also have centers that are regionally focused on Asia, on the Middle East, and on Mexico and Latin America in particular. The roots of the Baker Institute really began with issues centered on the Middle East and North Africa. So it's kind of interesting to be here and have the discussion we're going to have today. Our founding director, who is still the current director, Ambassador Ed Durigian, during his time in public service, served as an ambassador of the U.S. to both Syria and Israel. So he brings a tremendous amount of knowledge, a wealth of information, actually, in a historical context around a lot of the issues that we'll probably discuss or touch on at least today. We still pride ourselves on being nonpartisan, on being able to have robust and vigorous debates, but then at the end of the day, have a drink and recognize that we're all still friends and we all still want the same things. We just disagree on the path to get there. That's in a lot of ways a lost art, but it's very important to recognize that. It's also very important in developing that sort of robust dialogue that you engage things in an interdisciplinary way, which is something that I'm actually very heartened to see in this program. One of the things that I've done in developing the Center for Energy Studies, which last year was rated #1 in the world among all energy and natural resource think tanks, is not to bring in only economists or only political scientists. When you're building a team, you don't want, if it's a we use European football, you don't want 11 goalies on the field, right? You need people who can play every position, and that means they bring different skill sets to the field, to the pitch. So in thinking about that, it's very important that you engage in very robust dialogue with people who have different expertise. This means engaging with engineers. So at the Baker Institute, we actually, through our scholar program, engage across Rice University with people in our civil and environmental engineering department, mechanical engineering. It also means engaging with people in the geosciences. So in our earth science department, we actually engage with people there on a variety of different issues. We also engage with people whose backgrounds are in chemistry and in biology, as well as economics, political science, sociology, everything. It all matters. It's also, from a very sort of selfish perspective, useful because I always learn a lot in every meeting. And that's what makes this enterprise so fun, because you're not just talking to people who have the same disciplinary background that you do. You're talking to people that have a wide variety of interests and specializations, and it's always enlightening when you engage on different issues, because one of the things that has been at the center of everything we've done at the Center for Energy Studies is a saying. You view the world from where you sit. So if you're in Marseille, you view the world in a very particular way because everything that you see is shaped by what influences you, by what you experience. If you're sitting in Riyadh, your view of the world will be yet again different. If you're sitting in London, yet again different. If you're sitting in Beijing, yet again different. If you're sitting in Houston, yet again different. And so one of the things that we have been very proactive in doing is engaging in international dialogue. At the Baker Institute, we actually host, on average, about 23 different international delegations per year from all over the world. These are typically ministerial level delegations. They're not broad sort of public engagements. They're private engagements, which will then sometimes filter out where a minister or a head of state or something will do a public presentation at the Institute. But that's not always the most interesting part of the discussion. The interesting part of the discussion is the private discussion, because you get to actually hear what people really think about a variety of issues that are on the table that in many respects are global. And that can be eye-opening, to say the least. And it really speaks to the point that we all view the world from where we sit. That is something that will come up in my remarks later during the roundtable on energy in the Mediterranean, as well again tomorrow when I talk about the role of shale in the United States and what it's meant. Because the U.S. is sort of a microcosm, if you will, of what I'm talking about. You have 50 states. Each state has a different political bent. Some are more similar than others. And some of them view energy very differently than others. Yet you have federally motivated policies that are trying to dictate direction. At the same time, markets might push in a completely different direction. And so it's interesting to see the dialogue sometimes get very vigorous and, quite frankly, not very nice. But that's a space where we try to sit and sort of mediate, if you will. So that we can understand, how somebody in Boston might feel about a particular issue versus somebody in Houston versus somebody in Colorado, and engage on issues through dialogue. That's a really important element of any any of the issues that will be engaged in today, or any of the issues that IMéRA or the Baker Institute or anybody else for that matter is undertaking. Dialogue is incredibly important, and it has to be robust, or else you're just preaching to the choir, we say. If you're just talking to everybody who feels the same way you do, all you do is reinforce your point of view without ever thinking outside the box or challenging the status quo. It's very important to do that. And I'll be honest with you, sometimes I like to just challenge the status quo because it's fun to, quote unquote, throw the grenade in the middle of the room and see what happens, right? But to me, that's where you end up with some really rich dialogue and some really rich discussion. So hopefully we'll get some of that over the next day and a half. I'm certainly looking forward to it. And I think that's all I'm going to say at the moment. I just wanted to give a little brief introduction to the Baker Institute and really highlight that I'm looking forward to the next day and a half and continuing our discussion about deeper relationship with IMéRA. So thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's an honor and a pleasure for me to be here. And first of all, I would like to transform congratulations, warm congratulations from our whole institute to both the réseau in Paris and, of course, to IMéRA and all our colleagues there. As I said, it's a pleasure. If you don't know where Delmenhorst is, I won't blame you. But if in your imagination you travel to Bremen in northwest Germany and then to the 80,000 inhabitant city right next to Bremen, to the west of Bremen, then you are there. A lot of things have been said about why would one establish a Wissenschaftskolleg, as we say in German, or an Institute for Advanced Study, and I can fully subscribe to all that, so I don't have to bore you with repetitions. Because thinking without taboos and giving space and time to think, that is the main rationale, and that's all it. So let me introduce you a little bit to the history of our institution. The Hanse-Wissenschaftskolleg is a little bit older than IMéRA. We are a foundation founded in, or the foundation legally was established in 1995. Activity started in 1997. We are a foundation under German private law, which is pretty unique because our founders are three public entities, the two federal states of Bremen and Lower Saxony, or Niedersachsen, and the very city of Delmenhorst, which itself is a very unique construction because municipalities normally do not engage in academic or scientific activities in Germany. It's just not their business. And that two federal states join their forces in doing that also is very, very unique. So, and probably most of you know the name of Gerhard Schröder, our former chancellor. He then was the prime minister of Lower Saxony, and he and his colleague from Bremen, they used a very short and very favorable time window to establish that foundation. And since then we are there, and as we are a foundation, and at least under German law, it's just extremely difficult to close us. Which is a privilege. The activities started in three, as we say, research areas. They were called neurosciences and cognitive science first, social sciences second, and marine sciences and climate research as the third. These have, or the Institute and these areas have undergone a development, or maybe you can say an evolution since then. And I should say that a few years after the activity started, at a very, very small scale, an additional area was added that was called materials sciences. And out of those four areas, after the second rector had taken over, at least I think some of you know Reto Weiler, who has just retired, first this little field, this very tiny field of material sciences was expanded a little bit, and also it was then reshaped and redirected into energy science. I should say material science was started at the Hanse-Wissenschaftskolleg because there was some research activities going on at the neighboring institutions. And what was happening there in material sciences all was very strongly related to renewable energies, because it was materials for photovoltaic cells, for solar cells, it was materials for the coating of, blades for wind turbines, it was battery research and all that kind of thing. So it made very, very strong sense to open it up a bit, to name the field energy, research or just energy, and feel all the colleagues from material sciences still feel at home, make them feel at home at the HWK, and that worked out very well. So that happened in 2010. What I should say is, but we have 4 research areas, and we consider these 4 areas as umbrellas or just as themes that we want to use to, to acquire the best possible fellows with the most interesting, innovative, exciting projects to come to us. So we don't think in very, well-defined disciplines or whatever. We think in subjects, and whether somebody applies to the HWK for a fellowship in energy, whether that is an electrochemist working on battery cells or a political scientist working on energy transition in the Mediterranean, or whether that is something totally different. Right now we have somebody working on thermodynamics and entropy in black holes. That is not important. It's important that it is a very interesting application, a very fascinating project, and a very good candidate. That's how we work. And what we really appreciate also are projects, be it conferences, workshops, or fellowships, that create bridges between the different areas. So as you say, I mean, these research areas, or themes, they are just categories that help us work. We all need drawers to categorize our work because otherwise we can't work. But we try to avoid that thinking in these categories too much. I already mentioned that in the field of energy, we focus a little bit, but not exclusively, on chemistry, physics, but also economics, political science, law, etc. What I had not mentioned yet was that we also have a program for both writers and fine artists. We don't have a program that we call art and science, but we have a continuous program also for artists to be at the Institute. We experience this as a very productive and fruitful addition to our work, and productive and fruitful to everybody involved, not only to the artists, not only to the scientists, but to the whole community. And the same holds true for the writers. In our statutes, in our thank you very much. Thank you. Good.
I have some beer if you want.
I already gave into the temptation of the wine for lunch. So, our statutes force us to undergo external evaluation every 10 years. These evaluations are carried out by the Wissenschaftsrat in Cologne, the German Council for Humanities and Science, which is a very prominent body for doing that kind of work in Germany. So, and both evaluations went very well. And this is, I said, it's very difficult to close us. If the result of an evaluation were a poor mark, it would be possible to close us. So we always have to strive to come out of the next evaluation with a very good result. So far, we were lucky to do that. We are very interested in exploring possible cooperations. This is the end of my short introduction, and so I'm very excited to be here. Already there are certain ties between the Handelswissenschaftskolleg and the IMéRA, and they're not only there, we hope that they will develop in energy, but I know that there's mutual interest on exploring a project on post-colonial studies, and we found out that even post-colonial studies certainly give room for energy questions. And I'm looking forward to all the discussions and presentations during this meeting, and I hope that in the end there will be discussions about more cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So I just want first to to stress that I am one of the 5 coordinators on several topics, and one of them is energy. But there are 4 others, and one of them is environment, and one of the coordinators is here today, Mr. Nicolas Roche, and 3 others. One is from science and technology, the 4th one is humanities, and the 5th one is health and biology. So, ladies and gentlemen, and dear colleagues, I first would like to thank my colleague Raouf, who chose to celebrate this event by choosing the topic of energy. Thank you very much, because you highlight again that this topic is very important. And as you know, and it was stressed before, this field is really a challenging topic for the society, and not only for this generation, but for it's a long term for other generations, and the problems will be more and more stressed for the future. So I don't want to say what has been said before, because it's a general saying, of course, which are very important. I just want to stress on 2 or 3 points. My first point is that to tell you that the local context in Aix-Marseille on the energy, and you have to know that in Aix-Marseille area there are a lot of players in energy. One of them is the Energy and Environment Agency, local authorities, the University of Aix-Marseille, of course, and also, and this is in the frame of AMIDEX, which has been said before. This is Aix-Marseille Excellence of Initiative, and this is very important when we have all these actors in this area. I want to stress another point also, is that there is another important actor, which is CEA and ITER organization. CEA, it's the Atomic Energy Center, but not only for atomic, but also they also have now important activities in renewable energies, and it is very important. And it's not far from here. It's in Cadarache, and we have almost 5,000 people working in this area. So let's come back now to Aix-Marseille University and also the other centers of research. So what we are mainly doing in this area in the area of energy is that mainly we are developing the basic science of energy. And you have several laboratories who are dealing with the research on energy from the basic science point of view. And we have almost 30 laboratories working in this area. And almost we have 300 people working on this. I wanted to stress that we have a big university, and this it is a multidisciplinary university. And from this point of view, we have laboratories dealing with research from the science and technology point of view, but also from humanities, economics, and so on. So it's really a good, we have good opportunity to develop research in the field of energy from multidisciplinary point of view. This is the first important that I wanted to stress, but there is also another point, is that there is not only research, but we have also education. And you have to know that we have almost more than 15 energy-related diploma from license point of view, but also master's levels. And what it is important is that in our PR2I, is that we try to enhance
the multidisciplinary approach for the energy, and we try also to have to implement a holistic approach for the energy, not only from one point of view, but global point of view, in order to try to get some new ways to tackle this problem, because it's a very important challenge, and we have really to change our mind from approaching the problem of energy. And this is very important, which is not, of course, very easy, because we have several tasks to do. And let me also to say 2 or 3 things of the role of this organization that we have. Is that first we have mainly a role of brainstorming and animation in this context. We have meetings, and we try really to create some working groups on in some areas, and this is in order to gather the competencies first, and also the approaches that we have, which is of course a very big challenge, and trying to encourage the emergence of interdisciplinary projects. It's a very hard task. And another point is that Aix-Marseille University and Amidex encourage to some projects, interdisciplinary projects on energy, and this is very important. And in this frame, we tried to create some institutes on energy in specific areas, in nuclear energy, for example, and also in microbiology for renewable energy for the future. And these institutes will combine not only research but also training. What I want to say is that, of course, trying to make this interdisciplinary approach, it is not very easy way, but as we are convinced to develop this approach, it's very important to continue in this way, although it's not very easy to have a project, because these projects are mainly, let's say, people who wanted really to get this project. We have really to apply, and the reviewers, generally, they are not really well adapted to analyze interdisciplinary projects, and this is very important to continue in this way. So, I want to stop at this stage, and I want to welcome again you, and I am sure that you will enjoy these 2 days, because we have a very big challenge on this topic, and I hope it will be successful. Thank you very much.
Just 2 minutes, because we are late. To tell you just a couple of things. One is that I didn't choose really energy because it's something I dreamt of, or is something an absolute. It's simply because this is the topic in which we can have the maximal interactions within the university, and that's, as Denis mentioned, there is more than a critical mass on this, and also for the highly interdisciplinary nature of this topic. So you can, you could have, of course, a brief idea of it when you browse the program. You see how many disciplines are represented there. So that's a very fascinating topic, actually. And the other thing is that the possibility to do something really strong here in Marseille. That's because we have the scientific skills, and the geographic position is not that bad. So one of the things I have been doing in the last months is to talk with the Chief Executive Officer of Sonatrach, Mr. Ould Kadour, represented here by Dr. Hoja, and also with my colleagues and friends from the Becker Institute. That's And my idea is to be able to materialize this chair on Mediterranean studies in energy, which mixes the territorial concerns with very important topic like this one. And to finish, just two things. When I joined this institute, it was for basically two things. The kind of things we cannot find in a department. One is freedom and freedom and freedom, because basically in an institute for advanced study, you can do whatever you want, provided it's high quality and interdisciplinary, but nobody bothers if you do things in the right direction, neither the university nor. So I'm really free here, so that's a very important thing. Freedom means that you can hear people with completely different opinions. And you can hear someone defending shale gas. I know that it's a big word here, but you have to listen to the arguments of the others. That's basically what. That's why you have to. I mean, we have to have the sufficient openness to hear to each other. That's one thing. The second thing is openness. Of course, you have to be elitist, and I'm very elitist in certain aspects. Actually, you can see in my CV I'm very elitist, but at the same time, we have to be open to non-academics, to the general public. And this is a place where we can talk also, beside the very tough and deep scientific issues about policy, about ordinary things with people who are not professors or even who do not hold a PhD. PhD is not very important, just to have to be open-minded and to speak to each other. Thank you very much. And I would say that we have to delay the program by 15 minutes to have enough time to have a coffee and talk a bit. And then we start the... Thank you. Let me just introduce this roundtable. As you know, we are in the process of creating a chair on energy studies in the Mediterranean. So it's exactly the topic of the chair. Just to mention two things which are really important in the current research plan we have for this. One is the fact that while we are in the Mediterranean, so it's a very, well, not a small place, but there is a local dimension there. Of course, the Mediterranean cannot escape all the impact, or is necessarily impacted by what's happening at the world level, with this massive effects coming from the shale revolution in the US, are all this turmoil on the gas market. So this is something very important. Just to give an example, so it's a local place. It's a limited environment, but you have this impact, which is huge, and we cannot just say we go for this and we omit all the extremely important impacts which are coming from outside. Just that's one. The second thing is, at the same time, we cannot ignore this economic impact. We cannot omit neither the importance of the environmental commitments, the Paris Agreement, etc., etc. So the challenges we have in the Mediterranean is exactly how to establish an optimal plan. I'm using optimal in the mathematical sense of the word, but to say a viable plan is maybe a bit less strict. How to build a viable plan, taking into account these two things, the economic impacts and the environmental, let's say, commitments, which are also extremely important, not only for the Mediterranean, but also for the planet. And these say, conditions, these important commitments have impact also at the local level. So this is what we will survey during this roundtable. We start with the views of someone who's dealing with this at the local level for I don't know how many years, but he will tell us, Jean-Charles Lardic. And then we will move to a more global view of at the Mediterranean level, especially with a focus on the MENA regions, implication of climate change, etc., by Robert Jacquemin. And then we move to even more global discussions on the trend on renewables and gas in the Mediterranean. So I propose we move directly to the talk of Jean-Charles Larry. Plus 15 minutes in principle, and then you have questions.
Okay, hello everybody. As I learned yesterday that I was supposed to speak in English, you will at soon notice that English is not my native language, and I will apologize for the mistake I may make, and I will ask you, if you ask questions to me, to speak relatively slowly or to speak in French as well. So, I was the former director of sustainable development in Marseille for 15 years, and for 8 years I've been director for Prospective. What I intend to tell you today is very linked with what I know Robert Jackmin is going to say later. First of all, I must underline that we think that all pathways have to be explored to address this dramatic problem, which is climate change, and to achieve the four factor objective, which means reducing by 4 our greenhouse gas emissions. Second, we need cooperation at all scales, and we need to implement integrated responses that link adaptation and mitigation with other societal objectives. This is exactly the vision I intend to share and illustrate with you from the point of view of local authorities. My speech will be parted in 4 parts. First, why local authorities are key actors in the struggle against climate change. Second, how we can act in this struggle. And third, how we can act in this struggle in a prospective view with new tendencies for cities. And I will end with the challenges we have to overcome to implement our prospective strategies. So, okay. Cities are fully recognized by the Paris Agreement as key players in the energy transition because urban concentrations paradoxically favor energy consumptions. As you may know that only 50% of Earth inhabitants are urban, and they consume 75% of the energy, so 3 times more than the people living outside the cities. Whereas capacity should allow to save energy. The proximity with the territory gives cities the opportunity and the responsibility of direct action and incentive on the actors of the territory. And above all, I would say that cities have a particular capacity to design and implement participatory, global, and transversal policies linking mitigation and adaptation and taking into account the complexity of human and natural ecosystems, which states cannot do. They cannot deal with this local complexity. So, what cities? Cities first can act on the production of low-carbon local energy. I won't insist about that, just say that in Marseille with 50,000 square meters of photovoltaic panels on the roof of municipal facilities. We have 25-hectare ground-based solar power plant on municipal land outside the city. And we have more original strategy for carbon capture. I could speak about Prado Reefs. You see a photograph of them, which represent exactly an example of multi-purpose infrastructure, promoting altogether carbon capture, biodiversity, and other socio-economic benefits. So, in classical point of view, cities can improve energy efficiency of their own building or private buildings in terms of rehabilitation and construction. We also modernize the public transportation offer to decrease pollution and to decrease energy consumption. But the interesting thing that only local governments can do is their ability to organize the territory and its operation to promote more energy-efficient urban metabolism and lifestyles, and we have several levels for that. First is spatial planning, of course, to limit urban sprawl and promote a mix of uses to reduce mobility needs. And we have mobility plans too. This is rather classical. More original are new territorial food policies, favoring local food supply and good and healthy eating habits. We must know that food spoiling, since agriculture to the consumption, represent, roughly speaking, 10% of greenhouse gas emissions. So this is a real issue. And we have cities can act on eating habits for inhabitants. I'm thinking of eating less meat, of less spoiling, of unused food, and less packaging too. So this is a big issue I will stress upon. Third, we intend in cities, in Marseille, and I think we have to do the same, especially in cities of the south of Mediterranean, to encourage low carbon and local development using new social practices. I mean circular economy, collaborative economy, sharing economy, inclusive economy, and do-it-yourself economy, with which we forgot in the northern countries, but which are still alive in the southern countries, and I think Marseille is between both. And these new social practices, inspired by tradition, often inspired by tradition, may be emphasized by the exploitation of digital revolution, which can encourage these new practices, these new ways of life, these new ways of working, these new ways of consumption and new ways of mobility, which may be the future of our cities. So this is not exactly energy production, and this is a subject which we discuss in many international conventions about climate. And these changes, these global changes at local level, has the advantage of not focusing on the energy issue, but promoting a shared quality of life that contributes all together to all sustainable development goals of the United Nations at the same time. I hope you like this photograph of Van Gogh. But with this new paradigm of local development implies many changes in the political managing, many changes in the spirit of in policy conceiving. And these solutions have to face several difficulties. These local and global solutions have to face several difficulties. First, the difficult recognition of these global approaches by the states. The states are often obsessed by sectorial policies based on technological approaches, because, of course, states cannot implement local and human approaches, and they cannot force behavioral changes. And in these conditions, local actors have some difficulty to assert and to answer the state directives for energy, because it's very difficult to evaluate and assert the externalities of our local and global policies. We have some problem with NDCs following Paris Agreement, because how can we prove the efficacy of our global policies on behalf of greenhouse gas emission spared? It's very difficult, because we have plenty of, it's more difficult than when you put solar panels on the roofs, this is extremely easy to do that. But we must defend this local approach. And we have other difficulties about the lifestyles of the future. What will be the shapes of cities in the future because of the changes in the ways of working, of the ways of living, maybe living in the countryside and working with 3D printers, and many changes which will have to anticipate, policy makers will have to anticipate these changes, which may have great impacts on the consumption, the energy consumptions in cities or in the territories. Then, of course, you spoke about that. It's very difficult for local authorities, for cities to mobilize scientists in interdisciplinary research actions, which we do some in Marseille. I'm in charge of the relationship with human sciences and other research, and we try to promote these interdisciplinary research actions. And then I will insist on a very new process, which we call legal transition. Actually, as we are facing a real change of the world, we cannot imagine a new world without a new system of laws and regulations, because laws and regulations are made to protect a way of life, a way of functionment of the civil society and the socio-economic phenomena. So if we change this universe, we must change law. And this is a research project that we launched in Marseille 2 years ago, following MedCop Climat in Tanger, which was a meeting preparing COP23 in Marrakesh, and everyone can participate to this new process. And at the end, of course, as a conclusion, I'll say that we need to strengthen the sharing of experience between local authorities and scientists, especially in the Mediterranean area, in order especially to experience and reintroduce in developed countries and developed and northern cities forgotten practices which are still alive in the south. And as an exchange, we may help promoting capacity building, decentralization, and local governance in southern cities. So these are subjects we can get further on, and I think this is the end of my 15 minutes.
Thank you very much.
I'm really glad to be here. I want to thank the organizers for inviting me, of course. And right from the start, I want to give you my take-home message here, written on the top of this slide, which you can read. And I try to complement it at the end by telling what I see behind the until ... For those who have their backs towards the screen, I read it. Faced with the challenge of climate change, we are not really willing to act now, decisively and collectively at the appropriate scale level. Yeah, I have my usual upfront disclaimer here. Since we were invited to speak freely, I decided to step off my CA box, okay? And so I got rid of my CA logo on all these slides. You can add the IMéRA logo if you want later. So these are personal thoughts as a citizen or observer, or still as a scientist, I think, but more as a witness than something else. So this, what I'm going to talk about is not my area of specialty, especially when it comes to social economics. I think I'm having a realistic and neutral stance. Some will think I'm pessimistic, but I think I'm an optimistic person, so I prefer realistic. And the scope of what I'm going to say started out with the Middle Eastern and North African countries versus European Union, but it can easily be generalized. So I lifted this from the IPCC GIEC in French report, and that the experts of that panel and other experts tell us what they need to do to act on climate change. I'm sure this will be covered extensively during the conference, but I just lifted these three paragraphs and basically to as an input data for what I'm going to say later. So we need to act decisively and globally. If I want to capture this in a nutshell, it's not as easy as I just stated it, of course, because even if you adapt and mitigate the consequences of what we do, it's still not clear we're going to get down or below this 2-degree limit. And it's not either that all the technologies will be available to do that. What's clear, though, is that we have to do it not at the local scale only, but globally or collectively. The word integration was mentioned by Bianca and others, I think, before. By means of also input information, the fates of our countries or continents are tied. It's known that affordable and durable energy is central to industrial development and to the well-being of population. There's a correlation between energy consumption and rapid population growth, industrial development, growing urbanization in many countries. The initial conditions are no good because we are all aware of this strong imbalance at the global and local scale. This is going to make our move more difficult. But we know that if we do not change the way we manage and use our resources, we're up for trouble. First of all, for ourselves. So it has to do with our social economic model, or oil and gas resources, and our security, our supply pathway or pipeline will be challenged, and also the political stability of the Mediterranean region will be at risk. Being an engineer, I cannot do without at least one number. So this 2-degree limit can be converted if you average things globally, everything being equal. Back of the envelope type of calculation, you get to this number of 500 kilograms of CO2 max per person per year on average. This represents, I'm sure most of you know this, but one round-trip flight from Paris to New York per person per year. So if you do more than that, you are negatively contributing to green gas emission, okay? Okay, I wasn't sure the order I would come into this panel discussion, so I thought I would throw 2 slides on this correlation between growth, GDP, demographic growth, energy consumption, waste generation. All these are positively correlated. So this is a plot of GDP, or rather primary energy consumption versus and GDP versus year or time over a 10-year period. It's actually the average change per year, I guess. So this shows that for European countries represented in blue, the GDP remains steady or even decreases a bit over this period. And on the other hand, developing countries of the southern edge of the Mediterranean basin and the BRICS and other countries are on the high pace red line scenario. This is another way of representing things. This is energy consumption versus GDP per inhabitant. So you see these two categories of countries. On the right-hand side, so-called developed countries or industrialized countries, which are into optimizing the system, essentially. They're already equipped and so on. And if they do better, they might actually improve their efficiency, as opposed to other countries which have to make the first step, and therefore they're going to need a lot of energy to get to the point we are already at. So we know that in order to avoid a crisis, we have to change our energy production consumption model. And also we know that the longer we wait, the harder it will get. But we have a hard time accepting it, because we also know that this will negatively impact our habits, of ways of living, or average standard of living, which means for the already developed countries, possibly regression, I think is the word we don't want to hear, or decay. Right, Ken? Okay, and this is the slide I wanted to take you to. So what are our reactions as citizens, scientists, states? There's a wide spectrum ranging from straight denial, you see that a lot actually, to a small minority groups who accepts this and is willing to act. But the vast majority is in the upper part of this slide. So just after denial, there is the do-nothing attitude, with some fatalism in some cases. Because, well, there's a perception that whatever I do, this will not make a difference, basically. So whether you are a state, a region, an individual, there's that attitude. There's also the do-nothing selfishness, because we think that the first one who's going to move has most to lose. Between countries, for instance. Okay, so you're going to lose competitive edge if you sort of shoot yourself in the foot by taking an unoptimized route, okay, or under-optimized route. There's the blame it on others and attitude, and expect them to act or to act first. So you name it; it's a long list. Decision makers, politicians, and the rich, the poor, my neighbors, the banks, the IMF. There's also those who agree to act, but they refuse to pay or pay more, and they ask governments for continued subsidies. I think it's probably most of us, because energy and electricity in particular are extensively subsidized. It's considered a basic community or good, and we don't often realize how cheap it is, especially for French electricity. As scientists, to provide technical solutions, preferably off the shelf. And this often means that this is ideal, because this is a way for not changing the way we use energy or consume energy. Some consider only the benefits of some solutions, but not the drawbacks. It's typical. But the one I've most trouble with is those who make up what I call unrealistic scenarios and put them on par with well-established technology or scenarios using well-established technologies. And we see that a lot, not just for climate, but also for electricity production. So I think this is unfair as a scientist. We shouldn't do that. We should distinguish them and make it clear they are not on the same footage or in terms of realism. Okay, so then this takes me to the bottom line. By and large, we are not really ready to act appropriately, decisively, and collectively at the appropriate level until we have our backs against the wall. That's my point. So yes, we are heading for a crisis. This is my contention.
Thank you very much.
Yes, I got invited today in my capacity of representing both my colleague at the World Bank, who is a friend of Raouf Rabat, I can never remember his last name correctly, who is the chief economist for the MENA region, and as also a senior advisor to the CMI, Center for Mediterranean Integration, which was introduced earlier by my colleague Blanca Moreno. But I must say that's only a short part of my experience with energy and professional life. And I started saying when you were out, Raouf, that I'm very happy to be here because of everything I heard about pluridisciplinarity. Always had a difficulty on focus on anything for more than 10 minutes, maybe a few months, and I loved always the possibility of being able to switch from one topic to another, especially university I went to, we let us do that. So one thing which is a constant in my life is I've been working for 45 years in energy now, and 35 years in climate. And energy, the good thing is that it changes all the time. And when you think you have understood what's going on, then it will change. And I used to do forecast of oil prices, which I did for 15 years, working with every oil company in the world. And in the 90s, it became awfully boring because they stopped moving. And so I switched to forecasting electricity prices. And when you ask me, when I present sometimes, they say, how will you define yourself? And I must admit, I have a hard time defining myself. The only word I found was good, exists in French but not in English, is prospectivist. I don't understand why the French have prospective and the English don't. So the best translation of prospectivist, according to the European Commission, is forward studies, forward looking. So I don't know how you say that. But as Woody Allen used to say, I like the future because that's where I'm going to spend the rest of my life. Now, I don't have many more years to go for, but I'm sure it will be challenging. So the topic I was given today was energy in the Mediterranean, so I tried to stick to it, and I thought for myself, is there such a thing? Is there a Mediterranean energy market? So the way I learned in school when we had to do our philosophy essay, you start with thesis, antithesis, and thesis. Yes, no, maybe. So let me start by telling you that there is no such a thing. Every country in the region is different. Huge disparity, huge. Of course, we have the North Shore, fairly wealthy, but with stagnant energy demand now. So for various reasons, you have lower economic growth, but you also have efficiency gains. When you talk about the Paris Agreement, climate change mitigation, the cheapest energy is the one you don't consume. We all know that. We have a hard time doing it. But that's where you start. So that's what's going on in the north. In the south, you still have fast growth because of GDP growth, but also because you have an increasing standard of living, but mostly because the southern countries in the Mediterranean are extremely inefficient. Amazing if you look at, I don't have the graph here because I thought we were good, I wouldn't use the PowerPoint presentation, but you can see MENA is the only region of the world where the energy intensity keeps growing. It's been growing and it will continue to grow. So huge to do on that. By 2040, according to OME, Observatoire Méditerranée de l'Énergie, one of my key sources of data and analysis on that, by 2040, 50, within take or not 10 years, the demand, the consumption for energy will be stronger, higher in the south shore of the Mediterranean than the north shore. So it's very important. That's where the CO2 is coming from right now. And even across the countries in the south, huge disparities. I'm going to broaden my definition of Mediterranean to include MENA. That's always a difficulty we have at the World Bank. And at the World Bank, there is no such thing as the Mediterranean. We have a region for MENA, and you have Central Europe. So the electricity demand per capita can go from 150 kilowatt hour per unit of GDP in Yemen to 16,000 in Qatar. You see the difference. And all of the countries of the Gulf, of course, and Saudi Arabia have a huge, the countries of the Maghreb and Egypt have lower level. The second important characteristic of the southern shore, the MENA region in general, is a hugely subsidized energy. Petroleum products are still subsidized. I have numbers, but it's really funny when you talk about subsidies. When I was employed at the World Bank, many of my operations were to try to reform subsidies. And now, you know, there's a big group, the G20, ISD, with the OECD and World Bank working on that. And they come up with a different number every year. So I to measure it. But to give you an idea, we're talking about something like $237 billion of energy subsidies in the MENA region, which is 30% of the world total. So the population of the region is only like 8%. And it represents 9% of GDP and about 20 to 25% of government revenues. Electricity prices are clearly below cost recovery everywhere. Now, the good thing is that the subsidy reform is now finally underway. It's been very, very difficult to get moving, but we had last week with the CMI and the colleagues in Washington something called CAP. Ralph was supposed to speak there, couldn't make it. It's the Climate Action Peer Exchange Network. A very interesting workshop with finance ministers of the different countries on subsidy reform. And so you need to do it. That's also very interesting, pluridisciplinarity. You say that you need a holistic approach. If you just say, oh, that's an energy issue, it doesn't work. If you say, by the way, it's not an energy issue because energy people don't handle taxes. It's usually the Ministry of Finance, of Economic Affairs, or something like that. But you need to do it with the social dimension in mind. You need to have safety net. You need to have targeted programs. So if you don't take a holistic approach, it doesn't work. So a very interesting topic for your new pluridisciplinary things there. Now, disparities, they are also on the supply side because you have in the region a variety of countries with importers and exporters. You've got some of the biggest oil producers in the world, of course, because the MENA region holds about 57% of the known world oil resources. That's the other interesting concept I discovered very early on in my career when I was doing a model of depletable resources that you don't know what it is, the reserves that change every year. And as soon as you start modeling it, going exponentially on the cost, then you discover it's no longer here, because if the price of oil goes up, the resource changes. But anyway, some people are able to tell you that it's about 57% of the world resources, and they hold 40% of the gas reserves in the world. So very rich country from an energy point of view, already starting there. And the fossil fuels, especially oil and gas, dominate completely the energy mix in the south. Huge amount, you know, many countries is close to 100%. You only have like Turkey and Morocco that consume some coal. But, there is a big but. The region is very rich in renewable energy. It's also the best potential in the world. So they have everything, actually. They have the oil, the gas, the solar, everything. And solar is becoming cheap. So they're moving very rapidly in developing that potential, and it's going, and the North already has done that. I'm going to say a little bit more about the European countries. Of course, natural gas is also playing a growing role there, and I think Ken will say a little bit more about that, because there have been vast discoveries on the eastern part of the Med. Egypt, by the way, I mentioned importers, exporters, I forgot to say, some countries keep moving, like Tunisia and Egypt. Tunisia was self-sufficient, they became importer, now we don't know. Egypt got very scared, they were going to become an importer, and then they made a big discovery. So natural gas clearly is on the move. Now, everywhere in the world, and that's the subject of another talk, I've given many talks on that. Is gas a bridge fuel, a transition fuel, or is it a balancing fuel? Renewables need gas. They need gas for the flexibility. The problem is you're not going to meet the Paris Agreement with natural gas. Be clear. Natural gas has CO2, so if you don't couple it with carbon capture and storage, forget it. And Europe, and in France especially, if you read the PPE, which is not yet available but coming soon, all of the gas that will be consumed in France will be green gas. So it's no longer the natural gas, because you're going to produce the gas from renewables. That's what they tell us. Huh? Now I'm going to let the CEA people contest that, because the question. Now there's a very, very interesting effect of that, is that the including Saudi Arabia, the oil producers started developing their renewable potential, thinking if we don't use our oil and gas internally, this is a very valuable traded commodity. Renewable is not. Then I will save my oil and gas for hard currency, and I will consume at home what I cannot export. As any economist that may be in the room, I'm not an economist, that seems clear. So you keep your oil and gas in the ground for your own use, because everybody got concerned with Saudi Arabia. I'm sure you've read everywhere. Here we have Sonatrach, and you know, say, oh, they're going to be running out of oil. I never thought Saudi Arabia would run out of oil, but you've read that in a few places. Now, however, if you also read what is happening with the Paris Agreement, is they say, we're going to stop researching for oil and gas. And that's what they really want to do. They want to tell the oil companies, you leave it in the ground. So if you think it's going to stay in the ground in the long term because there won't be any demand, all the cars will be electric or doing something else, hydrogen, then you're going to want to produce it now as fast as possible before there is no market. So are you leaving it in the ground and using renewables? Just a dilemma here dilemma you have to solve. Okay, a few words on the north. Yeah, okay, so I'm going to have to conclude really quickly. Oh, well, I have not more to tell you, but I can tell you more tomorrow. On the north, we have the European Union. The north of Mediterranean is mostly EU countries, with Turkey that is not EU, but is trying hard to become EU. So one day they will become EU, I think. I think they will happen. But what is leading here is the new policy of the European Union and what is called the Clean Energy for All package. Very important. They want to be leader in renewable development. They want to lead the fight against climate change. They have taken more ambitious targets than anybody else, and now the target is Parliament made it even stronger than the Commission, 32% renewables by 2030. Zero carbon in the power sector by 2050. Basically, that's what it means. So the full power sector running on renewables, and it's happening fast. It's amazing now. In the UK, I just read this morning, the capacity installed, which is renewable, is bigger than the fossil fuels. UK, and you have some wind, but you have no solar energies there. And they wish, but so, and all of that is centered about developing the technology for their own use and for transfer. And they have developed a number of instruments for technical assistance and financing, such as the External Investment Plan, which is the external dimension of the Juncker plan you may have heard of. And they're modifying the CEF, the Connecting Europe Facility, which is for the interconnectors to also cover joint projects. Okay, so the north, the south, and the Mediterranean, what's going on here? So I'm going to prove to you there is something as the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean has always attracted interest. Remember, the invasion started as the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire. I had seen a wonderful map that shows you all the invasion in the Mediterranean. I can't retrieve it. But you look at it, it's the, in French, c'est la mer de l'intérieur. It means the sea in the middle. So it's covered, and everybody wants the Mediterranean. Everybody wants it. It's something very important. It's where three continents meet. So it's actually a very interesting microcosm of what's going on in the climate negotiation and the Paris Agreement, because 10% of the world countries cluster around the Mediterranean, a very small sea. They share an ecosystem. So, 10% of the world, so that 10% means 20 countries or so around the Mediterranean. And they're interconnected by infrastructures, they exchange goods, they exchange people, they exchange migrants. And we keep hearing about the Mediterranean migrants, but it's not new. There have always been migrants in the Mediterranean, always, since even this millennium, actually. But it's in an ideal strategic and geographical position to become a major energy hub. It connects the east and the west. It connects the south and the north. It's in between Europe and Africa. Africa, we always hear, is where the future lies. It's between the Atlantic and the Mediterranean Sea, and it has some unique features, if we want to be optimistic, to address climate issues. It has vast solar resources. I remember this map from Desertec that showed that a small square in the desert in the Sahara could meet the world needs, for a long time. It has a lot of land, so you don't have a problem where you put your panels and windmills and all the stuff. And you have a proximity to markets in Europe with a very strong appetite for carbon-less power. So I would like to deliver optimism rather than saying crisis. I have a vision for a solution. If you remember, Europe was created around coal. That's where we started, the European coal and steel community. That was the ancestor of the European Commission, the community, which became the European Union. So maybe we could build the Mediterranean Union around the sun, the solar, because that's a common feature and something can share. And I also think, but I think some other people will talk about it, that it's a wonderful place to address and to be a testing ground for the water energy nexus, because it's also the place in the world where there is the most demand for desalination, and renewable energy is perfect for desalination. So in conclusion, what I'm saying is connecting countries of the southern Mediterranean, which have rich in carbon-free and energy resources, to countries in the north which have a strong appetite for carbon-free electricity and are willing to pay for it, they have the means, will support the optimum, and I'm using the word optimum, not just because I'm an optimization specialist and optimistic as well, but development of renewable energy potential of the region to the benefits of all Mediterranean countries. It will create huge economic and jobs and business opportunities. If you can build also the infrastructure to do the connectivity. So jobs, everything, everybody would be happy. What does it require? Something difficult, which is called cooperation. Regional integration and cooperation is essential to ensure an effective and affordable energy transition, taking advantage of free trade, evening out variability in energy resources, safeguarding security of supply, coordinating mitigation, adaptation measures, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, this is the topic of my talk tomorrow, so juste un petit coup de pub, so you can hear le deuxième épisode, what comes next on the... Thank you.
So I am Paul Luquez. I am Deputy Director of CAP Energie. CAP Energie is an energy cluster in this region, in Aix-en-Provence, and in charge of to promote innovation between public and research sector to help projects, and it's focused only on decarbonized energy. And we have, in our domain, we have the region, but also the island, like Corsica, La Réunion, etc. So we are also working on isolated area. But I have also another hat. I will explain during my speech. I am also chairing the International Agreement on Hydrogen at IEA level, International Energy Agency, because I work in hydrogen since 18 years. So I know the story of hydrogen. But now, as a chair, I think we have our two speakers. And I want to introduce now the first speaker, Marie Lamoureux. In fact, you have 20-25 minutes maximum, because we have to respect strictly the time schedule in order to finish at 7:15. And maybe to have a 5-minute question. So the floor is yours for your speech. Okay, I can go.
So thank you, and first of all I would like to say that it is my great pleasure to be here today and to share views with you on the challenges and prospects of energy, and as far as I'm concerned, the challenges and prospects of energy law. I think I am the only lawyer in this conference, so this will be my focus. And I would like to thank the organizers for their kind invitation. So when I first thought about the topic I could address during this conference, the question I asked myself was simple. What is the future of energy law? And since the future is starting right now, what are the current trends of energy law that tell us what could be this future? And the simple and immediate answer is that energy law should be understood as sustainable energy law. But to be true, this is not so easy to say because energy law itself is not well defined. It might be surprising, but there is still no real consensus on what is energy law. It has been 20 years since a seminal article published by Adrian Brodbrook in Australia called Energy Law as an Academic Discipline. 20 years. And yet this debate is still ongoing in France, especially what is energy law. But precisely, I think that the contemporary discussions on the future of energy production and consumption, and especially the reflections on sustainable energy systems, is a great opportunity in the legal field to resolve this still unresolved question, what is energy law, and to go further, what should be energy law. Building sustainable energy law is the opportunity, I think, to finally offer a conceptual basis to energy law, to finally go to the roots of energy law, a field of law which is based on core values and objectives. But then, what exactly is sustainable energy law? At first sight, sustainable energy law means a legal system that supports the move towards a more secure and sustainable energy system, protecting human health and the environment while guaranteeing access to energy. This means a legal system that fosters structural changes for the energy sector through greater energy efficiency, larger contributions from renewable energies, or a strong reduction of oil consumption, to cite just a few of the many challenges that the legal system must address. In addition, the future of energy law is not only to support sustainable energy system. It is, in many ways, already the current situation. It is to do it in an effective and satisfying way. It is to respond to the many challenges in an effective and efficient way. Some improvements have already been made in this perspective, and I would like to show in this presentation that French and European law offer important contributions in this respect. The French and European legislators have adopted significant reforms towards a more secure and sustainable energy system, even if, of course, and as we will see, there are still many challenges that should be addressed. So, first of all, what is the current situation? For now, we can say that there is no real guiding principle of sustainable energy law, but at least French and European law set out some general objectives that are worth considering because they contribute to build a sustainable energy system and to foster its legal recognition. As far as European law is concerned, first, the general objectives of energy law are set out in the provisions of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. And in brief, the main objectives of the European energy policy, as they are expressed in this treaty, are to ensure the functioning of energy markets, to ensure security of energy supply, to promote energy efficiency, energy saving, and the development of renewable energies. But the European Union has also developed a very ambitious integrated climate and energy policy. As you certainly know, a top priority for the European Union is to address climate change concerns. and considering the key role of energy production and consumption in the historic increase of greenhouse gas emissions, the European Union has developed this integrated climate and energy policy. Within this framework, the European Union has set climate and energy targets for 2020. And this 2020 strategy is based, as you probably know, on 3 targets. First of all, reducing the European Union's greenhouse gas emissions by 20%. Secondly, bringing renewable energy up to a 20% share of overall Union energy consumption. And finally, reducing European energy consumption by 20%. And these targets were implemented by a climate and energy package of binding legislation in 2009. And a few years later, the European Union's leaders reinforced their commitment to make the European energy system more secure and sustainable by adopting the 2030 climate and energy framework. The centerpiece of this framework is the target to reduce the European Union's greenhouse gas emissions by at least 40% by 2030. And again, energy efficiency and renewable energies are key parts of this framework. And again, those targets have been implemented in several packages of binding legislation, especially by the so-called Clean Energy Package, which has been adopted recently. Some of the text of this package have been adopted recently. For example, the revised directive on energy performance in buildings, and some of the texts are still in the process to be adopted, but they will be adopted shortly. For example, the revised directive on energy efficiency and the revised directive on renewables. So it is quite obvious that energy efficiency and renewable energies are the 2 pillars of what might be called European Sustainable Energy Law, along with the objectives to ensure security of supply and to ensure the well-functioning of energy markets. When it comes to the national legal system, French law also sets its own objectives for the energy sector, and these objectives are provided for in the French Energy Code. And in its current form, this section has been adopted by the Energy Transition Act in 2015, which is the cornerstone for the legal implementation in France of energy transition. And therefore, these objectives are devoted to fostering the energy transition process, and they are, of course, an important step forward in building sustainable energy law. So, what are these main objectives of the French energy policy? In brief, they are to ensure security of supply, to maintain a competitive energy price and to fight against energy poverty, to protect human health and the environment, and to assert a right to access to energy. And this introductory section of the French Energy Code further provides for the main actions to be carried out in order to achieve these objectives, which include notably the necessity to improve energy efficiency and energy saving, again, and to diversify the energy mix by limiting the use of fossil fuels and supporting the development of renewables. In addition to those general objectives, the French Energy Code, as amended by the Energy Transition Act, sets out some quantitative targets for national energy production and consumption. These include the target to cut consumption of fossil fuels of 30% by 2030, and more generally to cut final energy consumption of 50% by 2050. In other words, this is the target is to halve energy consumption, which is obviously a very ambitious target. And regarding energy production, and especially electricity generation, the targets are ambitious too, and they also illustrate some important innovations in the French energy policy. Indeed, the French energy transition builds on the decision to gradually shifting electricity generation from nuclear power to renewable energy technologies. At least this is what is reflected by the Energy Transition Act. This text sets a target to bring the share of renewables in the electricity production to 40% by 2030, being recalled that the share of renewables in the electricity generation in France is currently around 19%, so it's a target to more than double the share of renewables in electricity generation over the next 12 years. And at the same time, the Energy Transition Act provides for an objective of limiting nuclear production. It sets a target to bring the proportion of nuclear energy in the electricity generation down to 50% by 2025, and at the present time, it is around 75%. So it is about 3/4 of the French electricity generation. So in the French context, this is an historic decision. France is mainly known as a nuclear country. And considering this, France's unique position regarding nuclear power, the target laid down by the Energy Transition Act is noticeable. It is noticeable even if I must add, to avoid any misunderstanding, that the law doesn't require the closing of any nuclear power plant. The law only introduces a limitation, a cap of the nuclear installed capacity, which represents the current installed nuclear capacity with our 58 nuclear power plants currently in operation. So this is not a drastic decision, but still, in the French context, this is the first time that such a limitation is decided. So, these are the key learnings arising from the study of the French energy policy. French law has today clear objectives and clear quantitative targets, which is a good thing. But I must say that in the eyes of a lawyer, this is far from sufficient for a very simple reason. As part of the legal system, those provisions of the French Energy Code have little value. One could even say that they have no value. They have no legal value, and the Constitutional Court recalled it in its decision on the Energy Transition Act. The Constitutional Court recalled that this introductory section of the French Energy Code are just guidelines. They have no intrinsic legal value because they are not prescriptive in nature. So this is not to say that they are useless. We need such guidelines because they give a mid to long-term view of the French energy policy, because they show the way forward. So it is not useless, but from a legal perspective, this is not enough. And of course, those provisions must be complemented by concrete actions and concrete provisions. So, and this is precisely the next part of my presentation, what to do to put France on track to meet these objectives, and what contribution sustainable energy law can afford in this process. We need, of course, to implement ambitious actions across the different key sectors. And this is an ongoing process, but I would like to take some examples of recent measures adopted in French law that are meant to implement these objectives, to implement the different targets I mentioned before. The first example, I think, is the most symbolic one. It is a recent decision to ban all activities of exploration and production of hydrocarbons on the French soil. Some activities were already prohibited in France regarding the oil and gas sectors, especially since the adoption in 2011 of a statute law that prohibited the use of fracking techniques and consequently prohibited the exploration and production of unconventional oil and gas, especially shale gas. But last year, the Minister for Energy made a step further and launched a governmental climate plan to accelerate the energy transition and with the view of ensuring the effectiveness of the Paris Agreement on climate change. And this plan pursued several goals regarding the oil and gas industries, and especially the goal to stop hydrocarbon exploration and production in France. And a few months later, in December 2017, this governmental commitment was enacted into law. This law states, in brief, that no new exploration license will be granted. So from now on, French authorities can no longer grant any permit for research related to all forms of hydrocarbons. Nevertheless, under certain conditions, permits of exploitation can still be granted to the holders of existing research permits, and existing operating concessions can still be renewed, but not beyond 2040. So production is expected to expire then in 2040. So this is a phasing out of exploitation activities more than an immediate ban, which was essential to comply with constitutional principles, especially the constitutional rights of the permit holders. This Parliament Act, as you can imagine, has been presented as a major achievement in showing France's commitment to climate change goals. And the former ecology minister and President Macron both said that with this text, France was the first big industrial country to dare to take this commitment, that they wanted France to take the lead as a major world economy, switching away from fossil fuels into renewable sources, and they expressed the hope that it will convince others to follow. But, of course, this may sound like a symbolic gesture, since the oil and gas production in France is very weak. France's oil production, for example, represents about 1% of our national oil consumption. And therefore, the main efforts regarding fossil fuels remain to do. And in France, it is much more a question of reducing consumption than production. Regarding energy production, one could say that the real dilemma in France is not between oil and renewables, but between nuclear power and renewables. And we have seen before that the Energy Transition Act set the objective to reduce nuclear power production by 2025, but the French government has already announced that France will not meet this target, at least not in the expected time frame. But maybe this is more a political and economic question than a legal one. In the field of nuclear energy, the purposes of energy law are mainly to ensure that nuclear safety is guaranteed and that some other requirements, such as transparency, for example, are met. And in this respect, much has been done in French law during the past few years, notably on the occasion of the Energy Transition Act. Anyway, if we turn now to another essential aspect of the energy transition, which is energy efficiency and energy saving. I would like to say in brief that there are sometimes some difficulties in this area that are specifically legal questions, legal problems. Of course, many reforms have been adopted in this area, either in French law or in European law, regarding, for example, energy performance in buildings, energy efficiency of products, and so on, leading to a massive increase of legal requirements. But even if these regulations are, of course, an essential part of sustainable energy law, it remains that energy law can't do everything in this area because the legal system itself shows some values, some rules, some principles that can sometimes put a brake to this reforming process. I can only take one example. There has been some texts adopted by the Parliament in this area that have been quashed by the French Constitutional Court because they infringed constitutional rights, such as, for example, the property right of buildings owners, regarding, for example, the obligation to undertake energy renovation work in buildings. The Constitutional Court held that it placed an excessive burden on property owners since they had to bear excessive costs. So those texts were quashed by the Constitutional Court. Admittedly, the public interest is at stake regarding energy efficiency policies, but energy law must keep in line with constitutional rules, no matter how valuable are the objectives. So maybe this is one of the many challenges of sustainable energy law, the necessity to try to strike the right balance between conflicting interests and between conflicting legal rules. Law can't do everything, but sometimes law can do better. And I think that the best example in this perspective is one of the legal aspects of the development of renewables. Indeed, meeting renewable energy targets require strong commitment of all stakeholders and especially businesses. And the legal framework is an essential factor in this process. Law can create incentives, but law can also, on the contrary, slow down the development of renewables if it is not well designed, if it creates excessive burdens, or if it is too uncertain. So the development of renewable energies doesn't only require the elimination of technological or economic barriers, it also implies to fight against legal ones. And I think that this is one of the main tasks of sustainable energy law. And I would like to highlight just a few concerns in this perspective. Here again, many legal incentives have been adopted to promote renewable energies and to convince businesses to invest in renewables, investment aids, tax exemptions, above all feed-in tariffs and feed-in premiums, so on. This is to be welcomed, but it is not always sufficient or efficient. And it is impossible to explain here in detail all the legal difficulties, but we can say in brief that it remain several legal barriers, which are mainly complexity, inconsistencies sometimes, and instability. Generally speaking, the legal framework, in France at least, is too complex and sometimes creates excessive burdens, and everyone seems to agree that the simplification of administrative procedures is an important challenge for the deployment of renewables. And I think that the most serious legal barrier is instability and legal uncertainty. All stakeholders, and especially investors, need confidence in the legal system, and confidence comes from legal stability. It remains, I think, a major concern in the field of renewable energies, where the legal framework is still very unstable. For example, a few years ago, it created major difficulties in France in the solar sector because of the many successive modifications of the French support scheme, and especially many modifications regarding the feed-in tariff system in the solar sector. And for a while, it led to great difficulties, to massive litigation, and to noticeable decline of investments in the solar sector due to this legal instability. Things are much better now. The solar sector is again in France a fast-growing sector, so it's okay now. But still, this example shows that we must be careful of legal certainty if we don't want to undermine our chances to reach the targets. Time is running out, so I come to my conclusions. These are just some examples, some concerns that show that there is still much to do in achieving sustainable energy law. And as a conclusive remark, just would like to add that these reflections on domestic law should be complemented by serious reflections in the field of international law, even if it is obviously even more difficult. It is difficult to reach perfect global consensus on sustainable energy in the international arena, but I think that this is one of the many challenges of future sustainable energy law. So, as you can see, there is room for many developments regarding both national law and international law. Thank you.
What I'll be talking about today is joint work with Bernardino Haddad, who's at the Bank of Portugal, and Borna Rajapaksa, who's at the Federal Reserve Board. And as you heard, I'm Ted Lockton's leaders. I'm affiliated with the Economics Department and with the Baker Institute of Public Policy at Rice University. First of all, I want to say I'm delighted to be here. I want to congratulate IMéRA for its anniversary. This is a world-renowned research institution, and really this is a testament to everybody who works here, especially the leadership. So I'm delighted to be here. Also, being Greek, it's also fun to be back in Marseille, which in Greece we call the old colonies. I don't know. This city was founded, I'm sure the locals know, but it was founded by Greek immigrants or other settlers, I should say, around 600 BC. All right, so I have a little bit of a dilemma now. I'm an economic model. I model, and I'm always, with the exception of an anecdote that I will relate at the very end, I'm always uncomfortable going away from my model. So I have many equations here. I realize that I'm not talking to economists necessarily, and only a subset of you are economists. So what I'll try to do is give some of the intuitions, and also I suspect that some of our findings are going to be somewhat controversial, and I'm happy to discuss those afterwards. All right, so without further ado, this paper is part of a research plan where we use macro models in order to model climate and energy considerations. This is an approach, by the way, that was pioneered by Bill Nordhaus, who because of innovating this type of modeling, has won the Nobel Prize in Economics this year. So our basic model is going to be actually very much based on, we're standing on the shoulders of Nordhaus, but we amended a little bit, and this is our main methodological contribution. So in this paper, we study optimal growth, and that will be our objective. So that's one thing I want to clarify in front of a disciplinary audience. This is a very common objective in economics. I hope the economists in the room are going to agree. Our objective is not to minimize the use of fossil fuel. It's not to save ecosystems. It's to maximize economic growth. But it's doing that, taking into consideration the fact that that has externalities created through climate change, and that those can damage economic growth. So there's a trade-off between using the cheapest form of fuel, which might be fossil fuel, in order to fuel growth, and the fact that this creates damages. So the optimal growth problem is try to optimally balance these trade-offs. Okay? Now, I'm an economist, I'm not a politician, so give me another objective, and I will solve my optimization problems, and I will come with a prescription for you. But given everything I'm going to say today is with that objective in mind, optimal growth. So I just want to, this is not usually controversial among economists, but it might be since there are other specialties in the room. So when we look at papers that address this issue, there are mainly two approaches. Really, there's another one that we are pushing for, which is the second one here. One approach is we got to invest big in renewables, and we got to do it early. I will tell you a little bit the argument behind that and the papers that have been more influential in pushing for that argument. We are going to identify that in the presence of creative distraction, which is something that Raouf knows well from his previous work, there is option value of waiting. And the idea there will be that when you have new technologies, technological progress in these technologies is very fast. You don't want to invest big, especially big capital, you don't want to make big capital investments in technologies that will become obsolete before long. There might be option value to waiting until the technology is mature enough in order for the investment to be optimal. If you want to interpret this in the context of policy, it will be something like, instead of subsidizing installation of existing renewable technologies, maybe it's better to subsidize R&D that will make future advancements faster, more prevalent, and then invest only when these technologies experience the right amount of maturity. We're going to have a quantitative model in which we study the effects of this. So the ingredients, as I said, it's going to be an economic growth model in the spirit of Nordhaus, but it will involve an energy sector. Fossil and renewable sources can be used in order to produce energy. There will be an environmental externality, so I want to emphasize this. We're not putting under the rug the fact that fossil fuels create an environmental externality. But we're not after minimizing the use of fossil fuels. We're after finding the optimal level of use of fossil fuels, given that we want to optimize economic growth. Renewable energy producers in the model can invest in improving productivity. There will be spillovers in this productivity that require some kind of a policy to accommodate this externality. As I said, there will be some costs associated with creative distraction. Now, in terms of our findings, our model suggests that policy there is a role for policy here because there are two market failures. One is the spillovers, which means roughly that innovations done through R&D in one sector can be taken advantage somewhere else without necessarily following copyright consideration. I won't mention any countries, but you can think of what's the motivation for this. So I don't gain the full advantages of my innovation. Innovation is costly, so I end up optimally under-innovating. So there is some policy that needs to correct that in the absence of a mechanism that ensures that copyright laws are enforced. And the second will be what economists call a Pigouvian, named after Alfred Pigou, a Pigouvian tax on fossil fuel use. So what this tax does is what we know as a carbon tax, and it's discussed in the literature as a carbon tax. And we discussed the quantitative implications for the optimal energy transition. Again, this is the last time I'm saying this, optimal from the point of view of economic growth. And of course, what is the magnitude of the carbon tax? So one paper that I want to mention that we are a little bit coming from the other side of the argument, if you want, is a paper by Semoglu, Aguillon, Bestin, and Hamous, a lot of Frenchmen up there. It was published in one of the leading economics journals in 2014. This is a paper that says that eventually, a switch is going to be made from mainly a fossil fuel-driven growth to a renewable growth. The more we delay it, the better we become using fossil fuel, and as a result, the transition is going to be thin shale, for example, and other such innovations. So as a result, the transition, which is inevitable, it's going to be more painful the more we wait. So what they recommend is investing in technologies big and early. It's going to be a cost doing that because they are not the most effective ones. But the costs are going to be minimized when you do this as early as possible. Okay? They do not consider a creative destruction argument, and this is what we do. So our quantitative findings, although our modeling is somewhat similar, our quantitative findings are going to be different. So now I'm debating a little bit how much of the model I'm going to, if you indulge me with 3 slides of modeling, or should I skip it? Yeah? Okay. All right. Sorry. Apologies to. So, you know, these models have to be intertemporal. Again, for the non-economists in the room, the engineers pick up on that very fast because underlying all this is optimal control theory. So there's an air horizon, which we model usually, as you see up there, using the integers. And there's one consumption good, which is meant to be an aggregator of all consumption goods. People discount the future, so getting a unit of consumption now is better than getting it in the future. I won't bother you with the firms, but let me go through the production process here. So output is produced by using capital, that's this K, labor, and energy. And this energy can come in 3 different flavors in our model. It can be produced through coal, it can be produced through using oil or gas, and it can be produced through renewable sources. Okay? Now, there's no nuclear here. This model is meant to be a model of the world, not a particular country, and that's how it's calibrated. It's calibrated to the world economy. In addition, it's a macro, what is called a macroeconomic model, again in the spirit of Nordhaus. What this means is that really we take a 30,000 feet view of the economy where we don't distinguish between, you know, particular sectors. It's an aggregate model. All right? This has some limitations. It has some advantages too. You know, if you have questions, I'd like to talk about this later. Now, one of Nordhaus's contributions is to introduce climate considerations in this model, and this is through this function D. And D stands for damage. That's a damage function. So basically, the way this works is there's a little climate model in the background. It's, of course, if you're a climate scientist, you'll be appalled by the simplicity of that model. But it's very hard indeed to capture the intricacies of sophisticated climate models, which really need supercomputers to be solved numerically, and an economic model as well. So there is a shortcut there. But we make standard assumption on the climate modeling. But roughly, the feedback works as follows. If you burn coal, and if you burn oil, or if you burn natural gas in order to finance growth, this creates a certain amount of emissions. This flow of emissions in its period adds to the stock of emissions. And the stock of emissions affects climate. For example, and this in turn can create things that will shave total factor productivity and make your output less productive. So let me give you an example. I work in Houston, I live in Houston, hurricanes are common there. Okay, unfortunately. I might have the same capital in my factory and the same labor, and I might have the same energy resources there ready to operate. However, if a hurricane hits and my factory is underwater, then I won't be able to produce, right? So this is the notion of the Nordhaus damage function. Okay, so it captures the fact that given climate change, events like hurricanes can be more frequent and in fact more severe. And as a result, this is going to affect my output adversely. Okay? So again, I want to emphasize we are after optimizing economic growth, but taking into consideration, that how this growth is fueled might actually end up having another effect of damaging growth through affecting total factor productivity, what it comes to total factor productivity. Again, we have Nordhaus to thank for this specification. I won't talk about energy production. I will just show you. So this is, again, for the engineers in the room, this is the optimal control problem. We maximize lifetime utility for the representative household in this economy. Again, this is to be considered as a household in the world economy, not in any individual country, and that's how the model is calibrated. The first constraint is a feasibility constraint. It says that what you consume, what you save, and the total amount of capital that you put in the renewable energy sector has to be less than or equal to your output. The second constraint is a constraint on fossil fuel, and that's a vector if you consider that we consider coal, oil, and gas. So it says that what you're left with is what you had, the stock that you had, W minus what you burned. One limitation of the model is that we don't consider technological progress in the fossil fuel, which, you know, it's actually quite interesting and very, in many places, like deep water, for example, it's really space-age technology in that sector, and there are many, depending on your point of view, exciting developments there, but we don't consider those. So we only consider energy, so fossil fuel energy productivity. The total amount of energy is the total amount from fossil fuel and that in renewable sources, and that says that capital in the economy has to be allocated between capital in the production of the final good, the fossil fuel production, and the renewable energy firms. So right away, writing down these constraints forces you to think, like economists do, inevitably about trade-offs. The more capital I put in the renewable energy sector, the less capital left for other purposes. So there is a trade-off, and that's partly what the optimality concerns. So again, this is an optimal control problem because it's not static incentives that are relevant, but it's the entire lifetime welfare. So when we look at the optimal location, we find that the marginal benefit from fossil fuel equals the marginal environmental cost. The marginal net benefit from producing an extra infinitesimal amount of renewable energy should be equal across firms. Equilibrium is lower than optimal because of the spillover externality. Equilibrium investment in renewables, so that needs to be addressed. I want to emphasize we should think of this as investment in R&D, not in installation. The model advocates, in fact, makes the sharp distinction and supports investing in R&D as opposed to installation. And finally, the suggestion is very much in the spirit of what Ken mentioned earlier, suggested by the plan suggested by Secretary Baker, the plan that involves internalizing the externality from carbon emissions requires a carbon tax. I will talk about the magnitude of this carbon tax, and that carbon tax, importantly, is reassigned in a lump sum fashion across the households in the model. Okay, so we calibrate that model in the world economy, and this is what we find. And as I said, you know, you might find it somewhat not to your liking, or I would love to hear what you think. First of all, the economy stops using fossil fuel before it's exhausting. So this saying that you might have heard before, that the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. We found, you know, copper and other things that were more effective. The same thing with fossil fuel. It would not end that age because we ran out of fossil fuel. In fact, the economy moves away long before it exhausts. But on the other hand, there's quite a bit more fossil fuel to be burned if we're after optimal growth. The cumulative fossil fuel consumption since the industrial era is estimated to be about 515 gigatons of carbon equivalent. And what our model suggests is that if you want to go after optimal growth, there is another 680 gigatons to be burned. Transitions to renewables is by 2105, again, later than many in the room, I suspect, would want it to be. But again, remember our limited objective, okay? It's after economic growth. I don't make the objectives. You give me another objective and I can come with another prescription. But it takes a model to beat a model. So given that objective, you know, you got to tell me how we get to different conclusions. That's what the model said. Finally, if you want to literally, again, to be totally controversial, if you want to literally interpret the model, this suggests that the Paris Agreement perhaps was the goal there is not the optimal goal from the point of view of economic growth. Rather, it finds that it's 2.8 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial level. And the Piguvian tax is estimated around $60 per ton of carbon. We calculate that at a constant world GDP of 70 trillion. Now, I have some graphs which I found out the French projector doesn't like, so I'm not going to show you those. Well, you can show them. Why not? This is a place to show them.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, it doesn't show very well, but let me just go through the show on my screen. So I would say that around 2060, is where we have about 50% of the world production of energy coming through renewable sources in the model. So it's a later transition. And this is the optimal growth level. So you can see optimal growth is initially declining and then stabilizes again. This is world growth at about little around 2%. World growth, okay, it's not US or any individual country. Once again, no evidence here for, sometimes you hear arguments that I think they are somewhat half-baked about the evolution of green jobs and green growth and things like that. Really, the economic growth models that deliver a substantial growth as a result of adaptation of green technologies, these are really not there very much. Okay? So, as promised, I will depart now from my usual modeling self, and I will end this discussion with an anecdote that I think is consistent with the prescription of a model, instead of offering you a conclusion. So you might think this is a typo, but it's not. An economic crisis environmental crisis was mentioned before, so somewhat tongue-in-cheek, I want to. Can anyone guess what this refers to? I promise you the date is not a typo. Just tell us. So there was another environmental crisis, and people were talking about this in similar terms as, maybe we heard earlier a little bit. Well, I won't get into details. I don't want to spoil your dinner. But using horses as the main means of transportation has a certain, let's call it, consequences. People in Manhattan Island those days, London, other big cities as well, they were estimating how many people will enter population growth. They were estimating how much horses they would be needed for this kind of transportation, and they were calculating, it's an easy calculation, I think, how many feet of manure they would be covered under. Well, that didn't happen. Instead, something else happens, which is kind of interesting. Well, a shift. Yeah, well, absolutely. You got it. So a shift happened, and one thing that is interesting about that shift is that it had nothing to do with the government. Our governments actually are notoriously bad at picking winners. There's no particular advantage in having a government picking which technology will be successful and which will not. There is an advantage, and our model actually speaks to that, in subsidizing R&D all the way. So then all the technologies will have the ability to compete in equal footing, and then the market tends to be better at deciding which technologies survive. Here is something interesting regarding this, and I will just leave you with that observation. When obviously automobiles got us out of that problem, they created other problems, of course, but that problem was solved through the use of automobile. Interestingly enough, at that time, steam engines were ahead of the internal combustion engine by about 10 years when it comes to commercialization. So I want you to think of the counterfactual of a government, this thankfully didn't happen, which says, look, we're going to be buried here in 2.75 meters of manure. What do? Let's take the leading technology and subsidize it all the way. What would have happened is that we would have subsidizing steam engines, and of course the internal combustion engine, as the engineers know, is a heat engine. It's not very effective, but it's more effective than steam. For automobiles, that would have been a dead end. In fact, subsidizing the leading, not renewable, but alternative technology at the time would have led us to the wrong path and would have delayed the eventual takeover of the internal combustion engine. So I would like to leave you with the thought of what are the potential steam engines that we're subsidizing today? Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting. So we have time for a few questions. I'm sure there is some question.
Just some factual thing from an historian. The shift toward automobile from horsepower in the end of the 19th century in London and in Paris, the choice was not between steam engine and internal combustion engine, but between internal combustion engine and electric engine.
Electric was there at the time as well.
And the choice was not decided in the street of Paris or London, but in the battle camp field in the First World War. There was decided that internal combustion was better than the electric battery.
Yeah.
So we have to think about more complex, because with electric engine inside the cities, the world would be absolutely different. And the second thing is when you took very fastly in the United States the horses from the agricultural production, you have two results: that the suppression of the oats production, which was necessary for the horses, and an enormous overproduction of wheat, which was one of the causes of the 1929 crisis. So we have to, when you, because the overproduction crisis is before the financial crisis.
Yeah.
So these are a tricky demonstration.
Absolutely.
And then last thing, I am delighted by your demonstration that optimization of growth leads to the catastrophe. Because we are arriving to 3 grades of above average temperature. And we are arriving to 2.8 degrees above.
2%.
We have absolutely no idea of what is the world at 2.8. It's absolutely not demonstrated that it is only livable.
I mean, we know dinosaurs.
We don't know, but we have no idea. We have no reason to think that it is a good thing.
Yeah. Can I respond? So first of all, this is the advantage of having interdisciplinary people in the audience. So obviously we're not historians, so I'm sure you know a lot better about these things. As I said, it's an anecdote, not a demonstration. Actually, usually I know, so it's not part of my formal modeling, obviously. We took the electricity out. With electricity, you're absolutely right, and we consider mainly the trade-off in Manhattan Island at the time. Although the quote that I mentioned is from London, and actually there were a lot of problems, including I mentioned manure, but there were a lot of problems. These horses were mistreated, they were dying, and there's some evidence that they were actually spreading quite lethal diseases at the time as well, because people weren't picking them up. They were waiting until the winter before they froze so that they could carry them. There are some really not very pretty pictures, but it was a very costly operation indeed. Now, the electrification versus internal combustion, that's a different story, which is very interesting, and that's not what this is about. Your second story, the second thing you mentioned about the overproduction and the connection with the Great Depression, I'm much more skeptical about, but that would be much, we can discuss this maybe over drinks, and it's not related to my model either, so, but I'd love to talk about this. Thirdly, you call it a catastrophe. I do not. From the point of view of economic growth, and given the best model that I have out there about the feedback between the environment and economic activity, this is my prescription. Now, you can always say, of course, we don't know, therefore, and you substitute whatever you want. The way economics usually works is, of course, the future is uncertain, but what we don't know, we assign probability distributions to, and we act accordingly. So this is in that spirit. Yeah, that's all I can say. So I'm going to discuss the specific of my modeling assumptions and some robustness tests, which we have done. But the argument that we don't know, therefore let's assume it will be a disaster and try to avoid it at all costs is not something that I would be sympathetic to, again, as a citizen. As an economist, it's not my job to choose the objective. So you tell me your objective and I'll tell you how to get there. Okay, thank you.
I am the last speaker before the last obstacle before dinner. And just before, when opening my presentation, just one thing about the innovation and research. First of all, in the French Energy Act, there is an article on research and innovation. No, it's not this one. I know nothing about it. No. This one maybe. Yes, and so there is an article. There is an article in the before I start my speech on the France as a national strategy on research for energy, SNRE in French. So it's in the French law. And secondly, maybe I will mention some words about that. But for the role of research and the investment on research, you know that during the COP21 there was an initiative called Mission Innovation. And Mission Innovation was signed by 20-something countries, including France. They commit to double the research budget in the 5 years period from 2015 to 2020. So France is doubling its research on energy, and it will be double at the end of 2020. And because research and innovation are seen as a major driver to realize the energy transition. So mission innovation is very important initiative accompanying the COP21. So now let's go to my topic. My topic is on hydrogen because I am involved in hydrogen field since 19 years. So it's a long story, and so I have a lot of slides, so I will try to keep in time. Why hydrogen? So when you look at the motivation, the drivers in the world, different cities, countries, you can find this type of motivation. First of all, some countries, they promote hydrogen because they want to get rid of the oil and gas dependency. Some other ones are to eliminate local pollutants. Of course, you have the climate question, and especially to decarbonize mobility sector, industrial sector, etc., global warming. And another interesting motivation is to integrate more renewables in the new energy system. You can have both all the motivation, or sometimes only one or two this motivation. Okay, so as I know there is some historian people on geographical, I put some slide on history. You know, hydrogen and fuel cell, it's a long story, and it was discovered in the 18th century. And hydrogen is not new. You know, in the industrial sector, you have industry master hydrogen technologies. You can see a lot of hydrogen trucks on the road every day, industry using hydrogen in big industry since 100 years, so there is no problem of mastering the technology of transportation and use. And for the fuel cell, the most famous first application were in aerospace, you know, in the Gemini, Apollo, and shuttle program, you find the first fuel cell. And after, what's happened is it's interesting because after the first oil crisis, there was a huge effort on fuel cell and hydrogen, and after a sort of, I don't know, traversée du désert in the 80s, and after, between end of last century and 2005, there was a huge buzz, a huge first golden age, I say, because a lot of car companies invest, countries, etc. But there was a disillusion. There was no synchronization between expectation and the reality, the technological reality. And I say around 2005, there was a decrease in the hydrogen interest, despite the effort in research and innovation continue, but without a lot of communication. And after, from 8 years ago, I said that we have now a new start. I think it's a good one, this one, because the technology now is mature, is ready, completely ready. For example, the fuel cell car are fulfilling the specification, except economics. But I will speak later. But in terms of all what you can expect from a car, you can fulfill in 5 minutes. You can have a range like a normal car, etc., a lifetime, etc. And second thing, very recently we had the idea of power to gas. I will explain later. In order to use the potential of renewables. And finally, a very recent game changer happened some 2-3 years ago when the cost of renewable electricity became to be very low in some areas. And that means that we have the possibility to produce hydrogen at very competitive cost. And now, this year, I have to say that we have a very good visibility. Just an example. 2 weeks ago, the Japanese government organized a ministerial meeting with Ministry of Energy for 20 countries, only focused on hydrogen. There was a communiqué after that. And so it was the first time that at this level, France was included, of course, in the 25 countries, and in the communiqué they recognize the role of hydrogen in the energy transition. It was the first time, and after there is some recommendation, concrete recommendation to promote international collaboration.
That's mainly due to nuclear power.
Sorry. No, there is no link with nuclear power for these things. For this ministerial meeting, there is no link. And I will explain later. In fact, there is now there is no country speaking on nuclear power to produce hydrogen now, not quite now. But because, in fact, the key point is that the hydrogen we use in industry is very, what we say, black, even it's not black, but in terms of CO2 emission, it's produced from natural gas, and 1 ton of hydrogen emits 9-10 tons of CO2, which is huge. So, of course, when we speak about hydrogen, we don't speak to continue to use this process. In fact, hydrogen is used to produce ammonia, is used in chemical industry, in refining industry, and it's a very well-known process to produce and to use hydrogen in the industry. And as I said before, it's all the chain of transport and distribution is very well mastered. But now, what is new? I will use a lot of slides of IEA, International Energy Agency, for my presentation. And what is very new, I don't see if you see that, but the price of PV and the price of wind now is very close to 2 cents per kilowatt hour in some region. 2 cents per kilowatt hour. In Chile, in Australia, in Mexico, in Gulf, Persian Gulf, etc. And now, even the production, I don't see if you see that, but even the production of solar, not in terms of power, because no, power doesn't mean nothing, but in terms of energy production, is very close now to coal and is over natural gas at the world level. But because there is some countries, like I said, in terms of wind or solar, are a very huge potential for renewables. But generally, at the same time, this area are a remote area, not very close to big cities or consumption area. So it's all my slides are from a report from IEA, very recent report. So the idea now, there was a famous report last year from Cédric Philibert, Renewable Energy for Industry. He calculates that if you have a kilowatt hour of 30 cents per kilowatt hour, you can be competitive to produce hydrogen compared to the traditional process from natural gas reforming. Even you know that it's along the full load house of electrolyzer, you don't need to have 100% of electrolyzer use to be competitive. Maybe at 30%, the curve is flat. So you can produce hydrogen at competitive cost, but the problem is, what do you do with hydrogen in north of Chile? Because you have no industry, you have no consumption. So I will come back after, because now I want to show you the different categories of application for hydrogen: mobility, stationary, industry, and energy grid. So in fact, for mobility, you have two kinds of application. The application with fuel cell, hydrogen as a gas in a car with fuel cell. And now the new idea, especially promoted by IEA, is to include hydrogen in what we call electrofuel. Electrofuel could be gas or liquid, but it's not hydrogen, it's a molecule in which you have hydrogen inside. It could be a synfuel, a biofuel, methane, etc., and you use for mobility. So it's completely different from the usage of fuel cell, because fuel cell is an electric car. In the second case, you have an internal combustion engine. And in fact, once again, a slide from IEA, from ETP. In fact, in terms of transport sector, the main conclusion of IEA is we will never arrive to decarbonize transport only with a battery electric car and biofuel. You see, even we multiply by I mean, it's not very clear, but the yellow part is a biofuel, and above it's electricity. So that means that we need, and the rest is oil, even in 2050. Oil keep a very important part of for transportation if we do nothing. Even we develop a lot battery electric vehicle and biofuel. So the main question at IEA level is to say how we can introduce more renewable in transport sector. And the answer for them is electrofuel, not fuel cell, but electrofuel. But I come back to fuel cell. So just to say that fuel cell and hydrogen is in the family of electric car. So you can have hybrid, battery, electric vehicle, or fuel cell car. And it's very easy to understand that you have advantage for battery electric vehicle and some other advantage for fuel cell electric vehicle. The main difference between the two technologies is you have only one device for battery. You don't separate energy and power. And for fuel cell, you separate power with the fuel cell and the energy with the tank, hydrogen tank. That means that at the beginning, when you want to have a very low range, of course, you have no interest to take a fuel cell car because you have to invest in a fuel cell and even for zero energy. And more you need range on energy, more the fuel cell solution has a decisive advantage, of course. So it's a reason why we have different markets, and of course, for low vehicle and for low range, battery is better, and for the other market segments, we can have fuel cell. And the other advantage of fuel cell is that you need only 5 minutes to fill the range compared to 8 hours for battery. So just to give you a state of the art, of course we are not at the same stage as a battery electric vehicle. We are late, of course, because there is only between 5,000 and 10,000 cars driving in the world. But you have now on the market 4 models, commercial models, from Toyota, Honda, Hyundai. So you can buy in Japan, in California, even in Germany, you can buy some fuel cell car. You have also a lot of buses now, hydrogen buses. For example, in France, to give an example, there is 5 or 6 cities. They order very recently some hydrogen buses in Pau, in Normandy too, for example. So you have a lot of application now with duty trucks. For example, the Switzerland ordered last month 1,000 trucks, hydrogen trucks. And you see a lot of application. The very famous one last year was the Alstom unveiled its first hydrogen train. It's, of course, it's not a TGV, but it's, you know, it's replaced the diesel TER. And now all the regions in France want to have this train. And, you know, there is a parliamentary mission to explore the hurdles to deploy the hydrogen train in France. In France, 50% of the line are not electrified. So it's not, that, of course, not in terms of passenger, but in terms of, you know, regional line. And you have also application in maritime, etc. And to give an example, very famous example, now you have in Paris a company equipped only with hydrogen taxi. Now there is 70 or 80 taxi. And you can, it's a normal taxi company. It's not VTC or Uber. And they have 3 refueling stations, one in Pont de l'Alma, another one in Orly, and the last one, I think, near Saclay. And of course, it's very interesting for taxi because they can fill the tank in 5 minutes, and which is. You pay the normal price? Yes. No, because it's a normal taxi with it's a company like the other company, so it's not VTC. And now you can order a taxi when you are in Paris, because at the beginning there was only 3 taxis. Now there is 75, so you have more chance to get one. And in terms of infrastructure, of course, the key point is the infrastructure, because even if you buy a car, you have to fill your tank. I say there is a few refueling stations in France, but in Germany and Japan, there is an ambitious plan. Now there is a 40 station in Japan, and in Germany they have an ambition plan, in fact funded 50% by the government, because it's expensive, of course. So the other part is electrofuel. And I give some examples of electrofuel. So, for example, methane, of course, produced from hydrogen with CO2, for example, can be used in the transport sector. Alcohol, a lot of hydrocarbons, of course, and ammonia. And ammonia is also a fuel. It's an option that IEA want to explore, even for maritime application. I have no definitive opinion on that. We have to work to see that, but the interest is ammonia is liquid and is easier to transport compared to hydrogen. But it's a new idea which is explored. Another application, I will come back after. Another application of hydrogen is to introduce hydrogen in the biofuel process. And you can see the difference, because in fact in the ratio between hydrogen and carbon in the nature is not, from a thermodynamic point of view, is not ideal to produce liquid fuel. There is not enough hydrogen and too much carbon. And if you introduce hydrogen in the process, you can produce much more liquid biofuel. So it's an idea. And of course, there is not only the mass ratio to consider. There is the economic, the environmental, etc., like in other technologies. But it's a very interesting idea. Of course, combined with, once again, internal combustion engine and not fuel cell. So there is no definitive option. Everything is open, of course, now on the mobility. On stationary, Japan, once again, is a leading country, and they install now 300,000 small fuel cell system in-house to produce electricity and heat. But it's connected to the grid because it's a 1 kilowatt fuel cell, and of course, when you need, for example, 3 or 4 kilowatts, when you in some peak period, you have the grid. And at the contrary, if you have no need, the fuel cell can be connected to the grid. But now it's a very huge program in Japan, and it allows to, of course, it was subsidized by the equivalent of ADEM in Japan, and now it's become competitive without any subsidy. And you have a lot of application, other application in the remote area, telecom tower, etc. Gas grid. You know that it's not a new idea, because before the natural gas, there was an hydrogen. The town gas was composed of 50% of hydrogen everywhere in the world. So it's not a new thing. And for example, there is a big project in the region of Leeds in UK. They launched an ambitious project to convert all the natural gas grid of the region, about 5 million inhabitants, into a pure hydrogen grid. Of course, it's not only in 1 year. They want to finish the conversion in 2035. And, but the hydrogen will come at first from natural gas combined with capture and sequestration of CO2 in the salt cavern, after renewables from wind. It's a very big project, the Leeds project, and there is an example of conversion. And when you ask the leader of project, he said, okay, we convert 50 years ago from hydrogen to natural gas, so it's not a big revolution to make exactly the opposite. Now, power to gas, because power to gas now is very popular since a few years, and it becomes because in some countries, the share of renewables become very important. And you know, in Spain or in Germany or in Denmark, in some period, you can have 100% of production of electricity production from renewables, and at the opposite, in other periods, 0%. And how we can manage this variability? So the idea is power to gas, means we use the excess of electricity to produce hydrogen. And in fact, since 6 years, you have a lot of demonstration projects, mainly in Europe, about 150 demonstration projects, but also in China, in Asia, and in the US. Just to give an example, in this region, maybe you don't know this project, but in Fos-sur-Mer, you have Jupiter 1000 from GRT Gas. The idea is to produce hydrogen from wind, for example, and to use as a pure hydrogen vector, or to combine with CO2 to produce methane. And this project is in progress now. It started very recently. And it's one of the big projects in France. The second one is also as the opposite, in north of France, is led by Energie, and the name is Grid. So it's a new district, and they want to test in real condition a mix between natural gas and hydrogen in all the application. So this project was also inaugurated 1 year ago, and they are now in progress. But this type of project, there is a lot of projects like that in the other countries. So, last part, renewable hydrogen for industry. So, first of all, there is an existing market. We have to replace hydrogen from natural gas by green hydrogen. Even we stay in this market, it's a huge market, because it's a 60 million ton per year. And, of course, it's a challenge, because hydrogen from renewables is very expensive compared to hydrogen from natural gas. But the same conclusion from IEA, besides transportation, decarbonization, also decarbonize industry is very difficult, especially the heavy industry, steel industry, iron and steel, cement. It's a very huge emitter of CO2, this heavy industry. And for example, for iron and steel, you know that we use carbon coke to decarbonize, I don't know the name for. And the idea to replace this reduction agent by hydrogen, which is also a reductor agent. not as an energy, but reductor. So there is some experiment in Austria to use directly hydrogen in the steel industry. And of course, I mentioned before, we can of course produce ammonia from green hydrogen, etc. So my conclusion is that you can see that hydrogen is addressing all the sectors, and finally is a bridge between all the sectors: transport, industry, building, gas grid, etc. And this slide is from the Hydrogen Council. Hydrogen Council is an association of 33 multinational companies. I think their turnover is about 2,000 billion of euros in total. And they grouped to promote the deployment of hydrogen, and they carry out some studies showing that hydrogen could represent near 20% of the final energy demand in 2050 and save 6 gigatons of CO2. Of course, this slide is not a slide, very complex, because to show that in the future, the energy system finally will be very complex compared to now, because it's a combination between centralized and decentralized. It's coupling all the energy vector, electricity, heat, and hydrogen, and gas. And after, you have to optimize all this flux and use. And you see that they had blockchain technology to optimize, etc. So there is a lot of space for innovation, even with digital innovation. And in any case, because you don't know exactly where hydrogen will be very massively introduced, but in any case, the electrolyzer will be the key technology, in any case. And for example, for Germany, they calculate that if they want to be 100% renewable, they have to install 600 or 700 gigawatts of wind and solar, which is very difficult. And or if it's not the case, they will be obliged to import renewable. And in this case, they calculate that they will need hydrogen as energy storage massively in a cavern. And they foresee that the main challenge for electrolyzer will be the scale-up for industry, because electrolyzer industry is a very small industry, and you have to multiply by 1,000 or 10,000 the capacity of industry to produce electrolyzer. So it's a big challenge. And the second idea is that you will probably seize the new international trade for hydrogen, because a lot of countries will be not able to produce their own energy. So they will need to import renewable from Australia, South America, etc. And the way to import renewable is to produce hydrogen, maybe to produce ammonia on site, and to carry ammonia. And there is a very strategic plan in Japan. It's not just an idea, it's a plan signed by the Prime Minister to import hydrogen from Australia. They are now in the phase, they test different technology, cryogenic hydrogen, ammonia, cyclohexane, etc. So they have a lot of research and development program. And of course, they have some agreement with Australia to import hydrogen, not now, but maybe in 10 years or 20 years. So that means that you can imagine that we can have new routes for hydrogen for Europe and for Japan especially. Of course, you have South America, Australia, and the MENA region is very important. For example, if we are looking at the Mediterranean countries, there is also very interesting project to produce hydrogen in Morocco with ammonia, and to import, for example, in Marseille. You know, Engie and GRT Gas, they have the idea to convert the existing natural gas facility, not now, but in 10, 20, 30 years, in a hydrogen hub. And of course, Morocco is a very good country for that because solar energy is very cheap. And also, there is a mutual benefit to have this new trade. So, of course, we will have local production. You will have auto-consumption of electricity. But at the same time, in the future, you will have also probably new scheme for energy. Of course, it's very prospective idea, but not only prospective, because Japan has a very precise plan on that. But it's what I wanted to show, and this slide is from the German program. So also in Germany, they are considering how they could supply energy if they want to reach 100%. I think it was my last slide. Okay, I don't comment on that. I could answer to the question, but I didn't see if my time is over. Yes, okay. Well, thank you very much.